Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Wednesday night Techthusiasm live stream. I am Jeremy Pyle, joined with Kris Deering for the second time. Last time we had a super deep dive all about Kaleidoscape, and we went over the UI and the platform and the details and all of that. And we've got another one of those here tonight, but this time it is Lumagen. So over the last couple of weeks, I was able to get a demo Lumagen. I'm probably going to butcher the number 5348.
Oh, is that what you got?
The
5348. Yep, the 10 input.
Yep. Thanks to Matt Blair High Performance Solutions, a friend of the channel, had a Lumagen in his own setup that he wasn't needing to have in his setup for a little while. So he sent it my way to play around with. Now, historically on the channel, I've talked a lot about my conjecture about video processors, Lumagen, MadVR, and I've talked a lot about on the channel videos how I've got my setup done with the K and the control system and zooming and wondering, like, what would a processor do for me? What would the experience of the room be like with a processor, and then maybe eventually a lens as well. So now I finally have the opportunity to have this thing plugged in and set up by basically the best pro I think out there to do this kind of configuration with Kris. So we spent a while, a week and a half ago on a Sunday. Kris graciously put in a few hours of time to set up a configuration, and we talked through and walked through a whole bunch of stuff. And so tonight we've got it here, and we're going to just kind of talk about it, use on the experience of it, go into some details and some of the particulars about, like, maybe some of the special settings and things that makes a bigger difference because of the particulars of my setup. If anybody has questions about this device, video processors, integration setup, all that stuff, fire them away into the comments. We will get to them as we go, and we will hang out and do this thing. So for those that may not know, Kris, why don't you give a intro for yourself?
Oh, yep. So thanks for having me on the show. My name is Kris Deering. I'm the owner and operator of a company called Deep Dive AV. I offer consulting for both consumers and professionals on anything AV related. I'm a pro calibrator, so I travel around the country calibrating, video systems for pretty much every type of budget, from family room TVs to Hollywood screening rooms. I've done them all. And just as a disclaimer for this, I am a direct dealer for Lumagen products. I've been using Lumagen products on my own for, I'd say, probably about a decade. I started becoming a Lumagen dealer about a year into owning the business. And that was mainly because at that time I was going into a lot of houses that somebody had bought a Lumagen from a dealer, and they sent them a box. And they're like, I don't know what to do with this, and things like that. And I kind of got tired of kind of being the tech support guy and the installer, setter upper for a product that was sold by somebody else. I reached out, and Jim Peterson, the owner of Lumagen, was like, oh, you'd be great for a dealer. You already know how to use it. You know the product so well, because I've known Jim for, years and years. It was the only video processor on the market for a very, very long time. So eventually I just said, okay, I'll start selling them so that, at least if I'm doing all this work, I'm the one that makes the money off the product. So I am a direct dealer for Lumagen. Like I said, have been using their products for about 10 years now. I actually help with a lot of the development work on the product. I do a lot of their, beta testing and things like that. I've done this in the past with a lot of other companies too. Like I don't do this for any kind of money. I'm not paid by Lumagen or anything like that. I sell the product, but I don't receive any kind of compensation from Lumagen for any of my work. I just looked at it as a lot like my relationship was with Oppo Digital back when they were around. I had a really good relationship with Jason, the head over at Oppo, where they're just really receptive to input. I had a unit, start noticing something like, hey, I'm noticing this, or it got to be great if you could do that. Oh, well, we could do that, and the next thing you know, like, hey, here's an update, why don't you try it out and stuff. And that's pretty much how it's gone. And, I've gotten to know them over at Lumagen a lot better. And they're just one of the few companies out there that are just insanely receptive to feedback. Hey, can you do this? Hey, can you fix this? Hey, can you tweak this? And I mean, when you're a home theater guy like me, or you, I imagine as well, that's, I mean, that's what you love, is when it's like, oh man, I love this product, but it could be, better if they just did this and this, and like, oh, you'll do this and this. Hey,
do it.
So yeah, that's kind of how it got started. And like I said, I set up probably, I do so much work with Lumagens. I obviously I sell some, but I get a lot of people that just, hey, I bought a box and I don't know what to do with it, and I offer services for that, kind of like what I did for you, where I'll custom configure them for them, send them a file, try to work to make sure that they're getting everything that they can out of the product and stuff like that. So, but yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So we'll go through kind of that whole process a little bit in our summary and conversation here tonight. So again, welcome everybody. As you're coming in, feel free, hit the like button, pop a message in the chat, say hey, let us know where you're from, let us know if there's anything in particular that you're eager to make sure that we cover, any elements of this thing, questions, comments. Do you have a Lumagen? Tell us about it as well. Why do you like it? And is there anything in particular, really, really cool or great that you think it does for your theater? So I should comment to kind of lay some background for what we're looking at here. So I am sharing, I got a dual camera setup again tonight, like we've done on a few of these streams. What we see on the bottom, the YouTube TV, that's the Apple TV 4K menu, just to show that I'm navigating that live here in the room. Got a whole slew of remotes here. Got the Apple TV, I got the Control 4, still the Neo, and got the Lumagen remote. And then, of course, the JVC. So we'll be able to pull up different menus and kind of look over different things. I do have the Lumagen in the room. I don't want to make anybody sick, but that little blue light down there underneath the screen is where that's sitting at the moment. When I installed it, I did try to put it in my rack, except for the fact that the remote is IR and my rack is in the other room, and IR doesn't penetrate solid walls. So I had to be able to control it in here. So I just kind of snaked some HDMI cables in and snaked the power cable in and left it up by the front wall. That's where my punch through is. My rack is on the back side there, just so that I would be able to control it. If I had one of these in a permanent installation, of course, it wouldn't go in here. It would be it'd be set up in the rack and integrated with Control 4 and all that. So I am running the Apple TV latest model, Apple TV 4K, and then the Kaleidoscape Strato. Both of those right now are input to the input to the Anthem AVM 70 preamp in the rack room. The AVM 70 HDMI out is coming into an HDMI input of the Lumagen, which is then going back out HDMI to the projector. So right away by default, I'm kind of not taking advantage of some of the really advanced features, I think, of the 5348, like the audio reclocking and some of the special processing that it does when you split the audio or kind of pass the audio through the device. I don't know if there's any comments you want to make about that, Kris. That's kind of one of the real benefits of, I think, the 5000 series or the more powerful unit would be to do that in a more permanent installation.
Yeah, so there's two main versions of the Raidance Pro. There's the 4 series and the 5 series. When you look on their website, it's just an infinite number of model number, this. But generally, there's really only two models. There's the 4 series and the 5 series. When you start looking at all the different numbering, all that relates to is how many inputs and how many outputs it has. So when you're in the 4 series, all of the HDMI ports are based in sets of 2. So you can get a 4 input, 6 input, or an 8 input. And then on the 5 series, they only have a 6 input and a 10 input. Yours is the 10 input. You use the same version I use in my room, the 5348. Mm-hmm. And then on the Lumagen side, there's either 2 outputs or 4 outputs. And on the 4 series, and on the 5 series, there's either 2 outputs or 3 outputs. So all the numbers all just have to do with how many ins, how many outs. Mm-hmm. Then from a video processing, because again, this is a video processor, from a video processing standpoint, there is zero difference between the 4 series and the 5 series. There is absolutely no difference in the processing that's going on in terms of what it can do, scaling, anything. They use the same FPGA, which is the main core processor, and all the same coding. So there's nothing that the 5 series does that the 4 series can't do. Now, and in the beginning, they were talking about possibly doing that, but I think they've kind of abandoned that, and it's just the same across both. The main differences between the 4 series and the 5 series is the hardware itself. The 5 series has different shielding. It has different parts. So, capacitors, the filtering that's in there, things like that. The boards are different. So the layout of the boards is different. And then the jitter on the audio output is about like half of what, I think it might even be less than half of what the output is on the 4 series. Now the 4 series already has a lower jitter output than the HDMI spec requires, but the 5 series is like insanely low. So they looked at it as, it actually stemmed from, I believe Jim had gone out to Europe and worked with the guys at Cinemike. They do like mods on Oppos and things like that. And they had done some modifications of a Lumagen and got it really, really low. And he had done some testing with it and he was pretty impressed with it. So he came back and kind of was like, oh, I wonder what I could do if I redid some of these boards and things like that. He also made it where there's voltage. He can do voltage swings for the different HDMI ports to try to help with some displays that are a little pickier with HDMI than that you can't do with the 4. So there was just little things like that. But I kind of look at it as the same kind of thing as you see with like the Oppo 203 versus the 205. It's just better parts, better shielding, lower noise floor, better jitter output. But the 5348 and the 4 series, they reclock. So they're essentially reclocking the audio output. So they're making it where you have a reclocked audio. So you're extremely low on the jitter output, which just means that any audio processor you have just has a better signal going into it. Because remember, any kind of thing like that is going to be additive. So it's whatever this is, and then added to what the next one is. So if you're somebody that wants to get the absolute best audio quality going into your processor, that would be the way to go, is a 5 series.
Got it. And then the rest of my setup is the JVC NX7 kind of sitting up above me right here. And then we're projecting the screen visible in the stream here below. It's a Seymour center stage XD acoustically transparent 163-inch scope screen. And one of my challenges in this space, and something that this device has been really kind of cool with regards to having it, is the fact that I can't fill my screen with my throw distance. So my room is something like 19-ish feet
deep
screen, front to back screen. I've got my JVC ceiling mounted and pushed about as far back as it can go against the back wall, leaving just a little bit of space for some airflow and whatnot. So I'm roughly about 17 feet lens to screen, and that's not enough throw to fill a 163-inch scope screen. Even when you zoom in, I hit the limit of this projector zoom, the lens zoom, before I hit the limits of the screen. And it sounds kind of goofy. It's like, well, why'd you buy such a big screen then? But I had changed this room over from a 16:9 screen, and with this throw distance, I can fill a 16:9 screen. But I changed over from 16:9 to scope, and I didn't want to go smaller for 16:9 content. So when I was able to go scope, I kept the height the same, and I went wider, figuring as well that marry your screen, date your projector, that I'd probably be changing projectors long before I would have any interest to go. I could have bought the 150 scope, but then later on I knew I just want the 163 scope. Why not just buy the 163 scope and hang it now, benefit from the bigger 16:9? And I figure I'll figure out the throw distance thing later by moving the projector back into a closet that kind of sits right behind it, or maybe upgrading to like an NZ9 level, which has a slightly shorter throw, meaning I can get a bigger image from a closer distance. So before the Lumagen as well, I was doing lens memories I think like a lot of people do. So I had a lens memory set to fill the screen height for 16:9. I had another lens memory that could still fill the screen for 185. And then I had like a 235, 240 lens memory where I zoom in as far as I can. And I put the bottom of the image on the bottom of the screen. And I've got some dead space on the left, up above, and on the right. And I was also taking advantage of some of the other JVC settings. And I always forget the name of this setting. So I just want to go.
Aspect. It's just called aspect, I
Yeah,
believe.
the aspect one. So in my normal config, I run for the scope lens memory, I run the aspect to zoom, which makes the picture bigger using the full 4096 field, makes it a little wider, relationally makes it a little taller, fills more image space with more pixels with a little bit of rescaling. And again, I'm still, even with that, in this projector, in this throw, I'm a little bit short of filling everything. So we were able to accomplish something now where with the Lumagen, I always fill the vertical field, which is pretty cool. I might be getting a little bit ahead though. But I do want to really talk about that because I think one of the really neat selling points of something like this is, do you have like a non-standard challenge, right, in your space that a processor essentially can solve? And I think that's also kind of like why on the audio side as well, in a really high-end room with very specific integration challenges or whatnot, maybe you go for a Trinoff because that thing can do stuff with your audio that lesser modules can't. And in this case, I've got some very specific video challenges that I can mitigate, but I can't basically resolve. But now the Lumagen has kind of resolved them. And so I thought that was pretty neat. But going back to kind of the start, where we started. So I talked a little bit about how we've got it hooked up here. And then Kris helped me through kind of the initial setup. We had to jump through, maybe it's a little strong of a message to say we jumped through some hoops, but we had to do a couple of things to make sure that we were updated. One of the things that the device lacks that I think would be pretty cool would be an Ethernet port and a web UI. I say that about every device that I use.
Yep, I agree.
So we had to, using the Mac in a Windows virtual machine via a USB over UART connection, essentially. Thankfully, my wife had a Cricket and had the right kind of USB cable to connect to it. Otherwise, I'd have been running out to Best Buy.
Now, obviously, I think I mentioned before when we were doing that wouldn't be the case if somebody actually got a Lumagen, because every Lumagen comes with that cable. You just happen to get a loaner from Matt that didn't have that in there. So yeah.
My box just had the device in a power brick, basically.
Yeah.
So we used their I don't remember actually, was it their applet to load? There's kind of two different levels of firmware that we updated.
Yep.
Got that all up to date, and then ahead of time, knowing certain elements of my space and my equipment, like you were able to kind of pre-set up a configuration file that we downloaded. Do you want to kind of explain how you do that and what
sure.
you do in the config file and why that's kind of unique?
Yeah. So, the video processor is just a processor. If you think about almost any processor out there, most of the time when people talk about processor, talk about audio. So we could take a Trinov, your Anthem, anything like that. Almost all of them nowadays have the means to offload or load on a configuration. So like if right now we went into your AVM 70 and we did a full Anthem configuration, like set your speakers, your levels, did arc, all of that stuff. At the end, you can say, hey, I want to offload all this to a file as a backup. The Lumagen offers the same thing. At any time, you can offload a file and have that as a backup. Well, like I said, I use a 5348 in my system, but I also have another unit. And just so everybody can actually see what a Lumagen looks like in not a dark room. So this is the unit I just use for testing and evaluate, like any kind of new firmware, building configurations. But this is a 8 input, 4 output. So you can see it's just a standard 1U chassis. It's got a bunch of inputs on it and then a few outputs, RS-232, as you can see right there. And then there's the USB port. But what I can do is I can basically just factory reset this one at any time. get all the information I need from you or a client or anybody else says, hey, I have this, I have this, I have this, I want it to do this. I literally just build it like that's my system. And I say, okay, click, 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 get all that stuff done. I can label it. I can do whatever you want, really. And then I just offload that file, send it to you. And then what I usually do is I have a document that I send with that file that walks you through step by step how to load that into the Lumagen. You load it in, and now it's basically like I came into your room and did it. So I do that a lot because there's a lot of people that buy these, like, oh, I bought it from a friend. I bought it from the used market. I bought it from some guy that sold me a box and I have no idea what to do with this box. So one of the services I offer is I offer custom configurations. And then when I do that, again, like, it's kind of the way I was going to approach it with you, but I just thought it would be easier since I know you to just do a phone call. I also usually send a document that walks them through. So I say, hey, what projector do you have? What display do you have? What are your input sources and stuff? So when I send the configuration file, I usually send a Word document that says, okay, in your projector set this, 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 and this, so that you're exactly what you should be in the projector. And then on your input devices, hey, for your Apple TV, put this setting, this setting, this setting. For your Blu-ray player, this setting, and this setting. Just so, because, especially on like AV forums, you get so many people that are like, hey, can anybody tell me what I'm supposed to do with this? I have no idea. I bought it. It's supposed to be awesome, but I want to make sure I'm using it right. Whether it's a projector, a Blu-ray player, or whatever. Me being a calibrator, I get my hands on just about everything out there. I'm pretty familiar with almost all of the mainstay products. So, I go, hey, for this device, I tell them to send me a list. And if I know what, how to set up the product, I'll tell them how to do it. And 99.9% of the time I can do that just fine. So it just offers a way for somebody that happened to get one through some other means or whatever, has an out to get it configured properly and things like that with as little to do on their own as possible, so make it as easy as I can for them. So. So that's what we did with yours.
Yep. And then most of all the tools basically that we had to use to kind of update, load, that you would back up with and so on, just note, are Windows tools.
Yes,
I have a Windows 11.
Based on Windows.
I have a Windows 11 VM running in parallels on this MacBook. And it was cool that they actually we had to look at some of the documentation as well, but for the M1 Mac, we were able to make everything work. Pass through the USB connection, get the COM port value and connection in Windows, and it was pretty straightforward to be able to do that. So if you don't have a Windows computer to get started and you have a Mac, rest assured you can do it with a little extra setup. So that worked out.
Yeah, the IP interface is definitely probably one of the biggest asks from most people, like, hey, I'd love to be able to do that. Believe me, this isn't something that's fallen on deaf ears. Lumagen has literally, I think, had like a few different people over time that have been working on that. And, sometimes it just happenstance that, somebody that they brought in to do that was unreliable, flaked out. They ran into hardware, issues with that. Because again, like, this isn't, I mean, really the only thing to compare a Lumagen to out there is the MadVR NV. Well, the NV is just a PC. It's, they took a PC, they built it, from parts that you get from a PC store, and then they put their code into it. But they have absolutely nothing, that's proprietary hardware. It's just literally a PC. You open it, they just put it together. I'm not saying that negatively. I'm just saying that's all it is, right? You're really paying for their software and them slapping together a computer for you. The Lumagen product is literally built from the ground up by Lumagen. I mean, every single board, every trace is done by Jim. Like it is, he has a spreadsheet. Like everything is designed from the ground up by him. So if they're going to do an IP module, they have to find an IP module that interacts with the motherboard and things like that. Then they have to have somebody that can code it and things like that. I know that they've worked on this several times. Sometimes again, things just happen. Right now, there's something that's looking a little promising, but, again, I don't want to, say like it is going to happen or whatever, because I thought it was a while ago. But just just so you know, that is something that they are actively pursuing and have been pursuing for a really long time. Because again, that like a lot of people have asked for it, and it would really kind of get rid of the last kind of thing that's a little cumbersome for people, is like, oh, I got to hook a laptop to it. I mean, again, most of the updates, as long as everything goes smooth, like, you know, a standard update takes a minute. The bigger updates take 5 minutes, but outside of that, you really never interact with the unit once it's set up. So
right. So in terms of what we did, maybe you want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the setup, the precursor setup to the Lumagen. So because we are, maybe worth noting as well, right? We're running essentially one color space, one connection between the Lumagen and the projector. We're running BT 2020 SDR, and the only thing that we're changing, or that is ever really adjusting, I guess maybe a couple devices depending on the mode, may have a 422 to 444 color space change, and then we have a refresh rate change. We're not using the color filter in the JVC anymore, and the Lumagen is taking care of all of the HDR processing and tone mapping and stuff like that.
Now in your configuration, again, I just, you know, for people that are chiming in that may not understand that. So in your case, we're not using the color filter, and that's because your screen is huge. You need the light more than you need the color. So that decision was made. You're still in the BT 2020 color space on the projector. You're just not using a color filter. Some projectors don't even offer a color filter. You know, JVCs do, Sony's don't, or at least most of them don't. You know, Epson is kind of hit or miss. You know what I mean? So basically, again, this goes back to, I look at what you have and I make recommendations based on my experience with those. So and then in the case of this, like, you know, we talked about, you know, you can change the chroma output of anything. You can make it anything you want. You know, it's not like the Lumagen can't handle a 420 or a 422 or a 444 input signal. The reason I set it up the way it is usually reliability of cabling and signal types. All of the internal processing in the Lumagen is mainly done in 422. So at some point, it's going to get converted to 422 on the output. Some of it's done in RGB, but it's always going to end up being output in 422. You can output it in 444, but they recommend 422. It's 12-bit all the time, and stuff like that. Like, chroma resolution is one of those things that a lot of people don't understand. But from you know, you have to remember, every piece of content that you have, doesn't matter if it's coming from an Apple, doesn't matter if it's coming from a disc or whatever, everything that you watch is 420. The only exception would be graphics being generated by a computer. So like a desktop interface, because they render that. But any consumer content is 420. It doesn't matter what it is. It's 420. It's either 420 8-bit or 420 10-bit. So, and then after that, the player or whatever has to do chroma upsampling, because most displays in the HDMI spec says, hey, I can't take 420 for this resolution or this frame rate and stuff like that. But 422, you know, is fine. You're already more chroma resolution than what's on there, and you know, from the eye, it's not anything. It's like much ado about nothing.
Yeah, it's not, I guess, going a little higher.
Yeah, that's probably outside the scope of what we need to.
Yeah, but it's nicer on a menu. Like if you take a PC, like you said, and you output 420, 422, or 444, like the desktop and things get sharper. So menus.
That's because you're near Nyquist, because you're in a text. You know, you're at single line resolution then. So in graphics, like PC desktops, things like that, you will definitely see a difference. In content, insanely unlikely that you're going to see a difference. And then you also have to, you know, the other thing is it's oversimplified as well, is that you have to also take into account the display device. So unlike a desktop monitor or an OLED or a flat panel, they might be completely different than putting it into a projector. And then you have to remember, like, some projectors, if you input one color space in, they have their own processing that might get converted again. So a lot of times when you talk to like product managers for projectors, you could ask them and say, hey, you know, your processing pipeline for this projector, is it in 444? Is it in 422? You know, so that you can say, hey, what's the one to put in that gives the least amount of damage, or what would you guys prefer to see? and you could do it on the output on that and stuff like that. So there's again, this is a topic that we could literally probably talk for about an hour on.
Yeah.
But.
So like you had mentioned when we were hanging out the other day that the Lumagen wants to work in 422, and so does JVC.
Yep,
so
JVCs are all 422. They can accept other ones, but their main processing is in 422.
So, that's that really for kind of the Apple TV. And here, the Apple TV is outputting HDR with the match frame rate, match dynamic ranges, and then the Lumagen will take that HDR and do the processing on it. The Kaleidoscape configuration isn't on the UI. It's on the web server, but we did, set up. You can jump over to it at least so the UI comes up. We did set, and my lights are going to go on and off as I change because of the control system. But we did allow display mode changes in the Kaleidoscape, basically indicating the Kaleidoscape to use an external scaler. Output up to a maximum of 4K. We're setting for a 235:1 letterbox UI here. And then there is a special content metadata setting or flag that the Kaleidoscape can output that the Lumagen actually does use. Wouldn't really be used in the setup prior to that, but the Lumagen takes advantage of that to kind of know what the Kaleidoscape is doing, right, in menus versus not menus and so on.
Yep. Yeah, they use a graphics flag that you could enable in the Lumagen basically just says, hey, if I see this graphics flag on this input, you could tell the Lumagen to say, okay, that means that you're in the menu system like you see right now. Mm-hmm. And you could tell the Lumagen that if you see that graphics flag, always output as either 16:9 if you were using the 16:9 menu. That you would never really need to do that, because if you're using the 16:9 menu, you're using a 16:9 screen, so all the aspect stuff kind of goes out. It doesn't really apply. But for this one, you could tell it to automatically, if it sees that flag, use it as 235 or 240, and it'll show it as either one that you want. But it doesn't have to recognize it. It just sees the flag and instantly goes there. So there's absolutely nothing where it's trying to figure out what the aspect of the content is.
Is it safe to say in a setup, in a general home theater setup, if you had a 16:9 screen, you're probably not getting as much value out of something like this, right? Maybe you're getting superior tone mapping, or you're getting tone mapping or better HDR processing if you have a projector that doesn't do it. But really the bread and butter of this comes more into play with wider screens and dealing with aspect ratios and some of these other challenges, or is there something else I'm missing if you had a 16:9 screen?
So this is a great question. So like I said, Lumagen's been around for 20 years. In that 20 years, how many people had scope screens? How many people had HDR? How many people had tone mapping? You really, like, video processors in general, I think are kind of a misunderstood, market. At the end of the day, if you think about different products out there, well, what's the difference between a generic Panasonic AV receiver and a Denon, and then from a Denon to a Anthem, and then from an Anthem to a Storm, or a Storm to a Trinov? Okay, they're solutions for different types of processing that may be needed because of the complication of the system. Mm-hmm. So a video processor is like a Trinov. At the end of the day, it's basically like a Trinov instead of something like a basic receiver or whatever. It's basically 20 years of accumulated issues that people have had with their video signal that they've created solutions for. So sometimes I see people talk about, like, oh, you go in the menus and you start navigating through them and they're really dense and it's like, it seems like a whole lot. Well, that's because over 20 years, there's been a lot of people that have been like, hey, I've got this problem. Can you fix that? Yep, we could fix that. And then you have that in there. And some of that. So now I always see, like, if you look on boards and stuff and people start talking about, video processors, like, the only two things they're talking about is tone mapping and aspect ratio stuff. Like, that's the only thing that they do. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I suppose, there's some people that's the only reason they think about them and stuff like that. But if those were the only two things, why would this product have been on the market for 2 decades already? Yeah. So There's a lot more to it than that. Now, the other thing is in those 20 years, displays have gotten better and better and better and better. And the content has gotten better and better and better. So even if we went back, let's say 15 years ago, when we were in kind of like the DVD days right before Blu-ray came out, think about it then. It was like you had sources that were 4:3. They were 480i, so they were interlaced. So you had to have scaling, you had to have deinterlacing, and then all the other things that go with that. I mean, heck, you can even go back as far as Laserdisc, and then you had, like, the YC separation. You had to have filters for the, chroma as you're starting to, try to process that for a display. I mean, like the layers and layers and layers of things that you needed 15 years ago that now all the content we watch is progressive unless you're watching a cable box. The content doesn't need as much processing as it did, but there's also a lot of clients I have that have older things that they want to use with newer displays. Well, sometimes you can't do that because of, the HDMI standards. Sometimes you can't do that because it doesn't look good because of this other thing or this other thing or this other thing. So yes, there is still benefits there. Honestly, I can't think of any display that wouldn't benefit from a video processor in one way or the other. But obviously there are setups that would benefit a lot more than others in terms of how many features they're taking advantage of. So in your case with a JVC with a 16:9 screen, it's like, yes, you would get better tone mapping. You would get, better scaling. You might get other features like Darby, things like that. But is it going to be as noticeable of like in your everyday usage case as much as a guy that has a scope screen and, so a couple other things, or a display that doesn't do HDR as well as your JVC does HDR or things like that? So yeah. And anytime anybody ever reaches out to me to buy one, I try to discuss that with them. I don't just say like, Hey, I want to take your money. I try to like go down and go like, okay, this is what you have. These are what the main benefits would be that I think you would notice day to day to day. You know what I mean? And, these are the advantages I think that you would have. And there's other people that I say, you know what, why don't you wait? Because a lot of people reach out to me when they're just starting to kind of build their system together. I'll say like, well, why don't you wait, try it the way you have it. And then after a month, if you're having trouble or there's something that you don't like, get back in touch with me and then we can discuss, are those things that something like a Lumagen would fix? Because a lot of times, frankly, there's people that talk about video processors doing stuff that they don't really do, that their problems that can't fix their inherent issues with the display, with the room, with the sources and things like that. At the end of the day, a video processor can't make a projector brighter than it is. It can't make it have better contrast than what it has. It can't make, you know what I mean? It can't make your room magically, now really good for mixed contrast and all those things. Or like in your case, like, hey, I can't make it fill that extra width because your projector physically can't do that. But some people think that they can do things like that, or they hear that, through random people that go, oh, no, it can do that. I'm like, no, it can't. So I want people to have a realistic expectation of what a processor can and can't do. And this really applies to any processor. At the end of the day, there's only so much a processor can do.
Yeah. Audio or video as well. And that's kind of one of the reasons why, like, I demoed a Trinoff for a little while. And I don't feel like super compelled to necessarily own one. Like I don't have that many speakers. They don't have major integration challenges. My room is pretty plain. So there's just, it doesn't have as much draw as a more complex, many channel count system or whatever might entail. So let's look at
that's almost like a studio grade processor. So, it's the bigger systems, the more channels, more problems with placement, all those things like that. It offers solutions to just about everything, but if you just have a pretty basic rectangular room with a basic 5.1 or 7.1 or whatever system, I mean, is it going to sound great? Sure. But it's pretty much over. It's like driving a Ferrari for your 35-mile-per-hour commute,
All right, so I've got the JVC menus up here. This might, I wonder if there's a way to get this. Yeah, here, let's get this a little bigger just to kind of see the text. So on the JVC, of course, like we mentioned, we're running SDR, but we're running BT 2020 normal, not wide. If you switch the JVC to wide, that's what tells it to kick in the color filter. We're not using any color management. 2.4 gamma, high res graphics mode, because we're pretty much dealing with everything in 4K here. Got low latency and motion enhance on and low there. And that is really a lot of the main setup. We've got setup, I guess, for video levels here. And again, setup for that, having the projector indicate that 422 color space, trying to keep everything in there and minimize color space changes. And then I have a number of installation modes that I have set up. This is what I was using before. I mentioned like the 178, 185, 235 are the main ones. And then I had been playing with a couple variations of the 235 aspect ratio, one where I mask for stuff like Top Gun, so I wouldn't be shooting light way up above and way below the screen once I'm zoomed in for the 185 to 1 sequences. And then another one I called 235 subs, which I basically do the 235 thing, but instead of leaving the image at the bottom of the screen, I raise it up for the instances where a streaming app or something might put subtitles in the black space, which is something now that the Lumagen takes care of for me instead. So I've got basically...
This is you have an NX7?
Yes.
Yeah. So just for reference, I you know, because it kind of shows the benefit of this. Go back to your installation mode. And then click that. So right now, you know, we just set it up for your full max. But let's just go to another aspect so that people can get an idea of like, okay, yeah, I just started a movie or whatever, and I want to move it. Okay, so let's see how long this takes.
And there's usually always a blank.
And this was going from 2.4 to 2.2, so you barely changed anything, but we're seeing just, you know, this is the waiting game that you have. And then you have this for every aspect ratio, you know, and stuff like that. So having something that basically frames properly instantly for everything, you know, takes all of this out. But the other thing that like people don't talk about is they always talk about the timing of this, but there's also the complication of it. Because right now, you know, God, even like 5 years ago, pretty much everything was scope or 16:9. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, there's the 185 stuff where it's like, you know, 178 or 185 or 235 versus 240. But I mean, now it's like there's so much content now at 20, 21, 19. You know, there's always been stuff at 166 and stuff like that. And there's no way for you to know what you're watching, what it is. Like, there isn't anything in the JVC that gives you an indication that says, hey, I'm watching this show on Apple TV and it's 2.1. So then you're in like the guessing game of like, okay, I set up 5 or 6 or 7 different lens memories, but which one do I use? And then like you started a movie up and you're like, oh, I know this movie's scope. So while it's loading, I'm going to go ahead and go to my scope one. So then you go to scope and it's filling up and you're like, right on. But then you remembered, gosh darn it, this is a Warner movie and they always default to the Dolby Digital 5.1 soundtrack and I want the Atmos one. So then you need to go to the pop-up menu, which now is off the screen and you can't see it. So now it's like, okay, do you go back to the 16:9 lens memory and then back to the 2.4? And you know what I mean? That's like all these things are just interruptions in the experience.
Yep.
And having a video processor like this just eliminates all of that completely. Like you play whatever you want to play, it frames it perfectly, or other things depending on how you want it framed, which we can talk about later. But like a pop-up menu or anything, instantly you'll see the pop-up menu. You make your adjustments, it goes away, instantly it's gone.
Yeah, and we'll demo that.
So yeah,
we should be able to demo that coming up. Yeah, normally, we'll, you know, family night, whatever, we come down here to watch a movie, we play it, start it up. To its credit, Kaleidoscape tries to give you the aspect ratios. They don't always get them right though, and they don't have the granularity of all of the steps in between. They kind of indicate 178, 185, or 235 or 240. But a full run of adjustment, like hit play on a movie, presuming that normally as well, I'd probably leave my Kaleidoscape UI in 16:9 because I zoned to it to the living room, and in the living room is a 16:9 OLED. So between going from a 178 lens setting menu to starting playback of the movie, right? The projector has to resync frame rate. It probably has to change from SDR to HDR. It's got to put the color filter in place, and it has to do all of that lens shifting. Like, it's a good 20 seconds of just like sitting there in the dark, actually having to hit pause on the movie because it's playing while you know, NX is trying to catch up to everything that it needs to do to get an image back on the screen. And it does that all in the dark. So everybody's sitting in the dark for 15, 20 seconds. Movie paused, just kind of waiting. And it's kludgy. It definitely like takes the home theater experience and it makes it feel pretty kludgy. Now, granted, the pragmatic response to that is it's 20 seconds at the beginning of a 2-hour film.
First world problems, right?
First world problems, absolutely.
But it is a problem, and you know, like, let's look at it a little bit extra. Like, if you look at an Apple TV out of the box, it converts everything to HDR and it puts out 4K 60. If you look at Kaleidoscape out of the box, it frame rates everything at 60. So if you start a movie, it plays it at 60p, and they do that because the general public, not the little tweak heads like us, they don't want to see anything resync. They're like, why is this blacking out? Why does this keep on like sync, resync? Why does it keep popping up like that? And these devices try to eliminate that completely. So, you know, a lot of the settings are geared toward, if I push play, it's just going to play. My screen's never resyncing. I'm not seeing black screens, flashing screens, and all of that. So I even have clients still that with like a Lumagen, they're like, hey, I just want to make it where the screen never goes black. Well, I could do that. I could set it up where the Lumagen always outputs the same frame rate, always outputs the same input signal, and it never changes at all, you know? So again, that is, you know, what we were talking about before. A video processor provides solutions for problems. Some of them are ones that, like, you know, the purists like me would just be like, why would you want to do that? But that guy's like, because I don't want this, you know, and I'd rather not see this than have this. So, you know, it's just, again, it's a solution for a problem that somebody out there has. So.
Yeah. The other thing that I'll layer on it as well, though, is like the in the room here, you know, or if you have a setup like this, you don't have the video processor, you're using these memories. Somebody has to be responsible for choosing the memory at the beginning of the film. And, you know, you can do stuff like this on a Control 4 remote. You know, I've got options there that are called zoom 178, zoom 185, zoom 235. And so, you know, I can at least still put the JVC remote away. I use the one remote. I can swipe over to this. I can, like you said, you don't necessarily always know the exact aspect ratio of the film. So you kind of pick it's like the nearest neighbor, the one that fills
and hope that that's the right one.
Yeah. Or, you know, get the one that fills the most vertical space with the least amount potentially of overspill. But I can guarantee that if my family ever came down here to watch a movie, I'm on a business trip or, you know, whatever, something's going on, kids are down here to watch a movie with their friends, or my wife is down here for some reason as well, by herself, probably never. But nobody else but me in this household is, you know, is doing this. So by default, the projector stays in 16:9 mode, and everybody else would just watch a scope movie in the 16:9 field. And that's that. So they're watching it with whatever, almost probably half the screen real estate used of zooming it up.
So with this, it should, like, again, a Lumagen, once it's properly set up, you honestly don't really ever interact with it. There are a couple interactions that you can have with it if you want to get, you know, do specific things. They're usually single button press. You know, there's usually direct buttons for those kind of features that somebody might want to use. But like, if you're, you know, in your usage case, if you have a scope screen and your family turns on your system and the Lumagen turns on, other than selecting the input, if you're using the Lumagen as the switcher, you really don't ever touch it again.
Right.
It is designed to be set up, by somebody it's a CI product, a custom install product. It's set up by the custom installer. And if they know what they're doing, you really almost should have no interaction with it. And I imagine that's the way it's been since I set it up for you, almost 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Really, probably other than turning it on, you probably haven't had to do anything with it.
Correct. Yep. I haven't messed with anything in the menus. I've tinkered with it a little bit. We watched, I don't remember. Oh, we watched Spider-Man, the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man the other night. Yeah, I turned it on and we've just used it. And then again, too, like you said, it would give the family the benefit of having a better experience without having to mess with anything.
Right.
That they would have messed with anyway. A couple other just quick things here in the JVC setup. So there's no masking going on here. The mask is off. Anamorphic is for the lenses, of course. So we have the processor. There is no lens in this setup. There's no anamorphic lens in this setup. The screen setting matters a whole lot less because the theater optimizer is disabled because the projector is not doing aspect ratio, or I'm sorry, HD is not doing HDR processing. That's all being done by the processor. And again, this aspect here is just set to auto, kind of no longer engaging the projector aspect zoom like I would with the lens memory settings. All right. We've had a run of comments. Let's try to do a rapid fire sweep through the comments, and then we can show kind of some of the Lumagen menu a little bit, and then some of the operation in practice. So just going to the top here, we'll sweep down. So JC Reynolds says, looking at a Lumagen or a MadVR is extreme choices indeed. So we talked a little bit about that. If there's any more specific questions kind of relating the two, feel free to post those away. Doc Yu says, hello from Colorado. He loves his Lumagen, does amazing tone mapping and scaling. Sweet. So we got definitely a couple users in the audience right now. Whispered Streams Control 4 driver is fantastic for it, meaning the Lumagen cost a few bucks, worth every penny. Yeah, some drivers in Control 4 you pay for, some are there. I presume in a Control 4 setup, you'd probably go serial. Between your Control 4 controller and the Lumagen. I have the Control 4. I have not put this Lumagen on the Control 4 system. This was only ever meant to be a temporary thing. Have it for maybe a few weeks or so maximum. And so I haven't gone to the level of integrating it like that because it's going to move on.
And I use Harmony in my setup, which Harmony basically uses IR, and it works great. Like, no issues at all. I have tons of clients that have it on Crestron, Savant, Control 4, Harmony, or just use the regular mode. Again, as we've kind of already discussed, other than switching the inputs, you're usually just turning it on and off and selecting an input. There are some features that if you want to use, you can. But I would say in 95% of my usage cases for clients, it's turn on, turn off, select input, done. Other than the occasional update.
Right.
So
Wayne K says he jumped into his Lumagen several months ago, just run basic settings for now until he can get a real calibration. Well, hey, we know a guy. There you go.
We
do. Whispered says another follow-up comment. So he's at his 2 years. So you did his. Loves the NLS. We'll talk about NLS in a little bit. Yeah, no more waiting for that motorized lens memory. It's definitely awesome for demo night. A couple of times that I've done like some AVS get-togethers, or we've had some Christmas parties or some other, come down here, do a bunch of demos, and like jumping in and out of stuff is so much nicer with this than with just the control system, especially a little back further when I was trying to have the triggers. It's really cool that you can do it. Again, like Kaleidoscape can tell the Control 4 controller what aspect ratio it thinks it's in, and then a Control 4 controller can kick into the lens memory, and then all this stuff happens automatically. It's great until the moments when you don't want it to happen and you're stuck having all of it happen. So I can't say how many times I've like actually disabled programming
Yeah, when you get into like in my setup, I have a variable masking system on my scope screen. And there's a lot of guys that use those same kind of triggers and indicators to move the masks.
Mhm.
And you're like, it's one of those things that when you talk about it before you get it, you're like, that'll be so cool. It'll
Yeah.
automatically do it
Yeah.
until you're like, you play a disc and it's like, oh, this previews in this aspect and this one, and it's sitting there changing, and it's like
Yeah.
going for and you're like, the first thing I always tell people is do not automate your masking. Just have buttons like you did on your remote where it's
Yep.
like this aspect, this aspect, this aspect. And then when you know what you want, click the button and let it do its thing. It's great that it'll do it. But as
Mhm.
soon as you automate it, you realize how many things can trigger that, from a
Yeah.
menu to a this, to a that, to a this. And you're just like, it's moved. Oh, no, it's going. Nope, it's moving. No, it's going
Yep.
back. It's like, oh, it's
When
just,
we
it
first,
sounds great, but it doesn't,
yeah.
it's just,
Nothing's infallible, and like the
yeah.
system can never adjust for all of its variables. I remember when we first came in this house, and then we had the Control 4 system set up. We've got lights and locks and different things on the on the automation system, and so our garage comes into our mud hall, and the garage door openers are they have relays in state and Control 4. The deadbolt for the entry door into the mud hall has Control 4 operation and state, and then the lights. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like I can set all this really stuff up. Like if it's this time of day and you come in through this way and you open this thing, like all these things can happen. And it's just like a cluster bleep of operation of like things locking and garage doors closing on people when they're outside and they didn't want to. It's like, you got to shut it all off. It can never be that smart to know all of the conditions by which it may need to make a different decision. So,
Yep.
yeah. All right. Charlene Toribio, he or she, I guess, they love their Lumagen. Awesome. Okay. A client. Giordon says, see the Darby logo on some units and not on others. What is the difference? You know that?
So as far as I know, all of the Radiance Pro series, which really is the only product, I don't even know if they're making the 2 series anymore. That was before the Radiance Pro. The Radiance Pro came out in like 2015 or 2016. All of the Radiance 4 series and 5 series have Darby processing in them. It is only for input signals that are 1080 or less. It does not work on a 4K input signal because Darby processing doesn't do 4K. They've been talking about a 4K product for a long time now, but I know that the main guy that designed Darby passed away, and then the product was supposed to be out like 2 years ago, and it just keeps getting pushed and pushed and pushed. But the Darby processing that's in the Lumagen is the same Darby processing that used to be on the standalone box. So it's only for HD or lower signals, and it is there on all 4 and 5 series products. I don't remember if it was on the 2000 series, and I don't think it was on any of the Lumagen products that were before then. But the only models being sold and built right now are pretty much the 4 and the 5 series, and they all have the Darby in them.
JC
and
Reynolds.
that can be turned on and off. If you don't want it, you can just turn it off and bypass it.
JC Reynolds says, how would you set up a Lumagen with a Zapiti reference? Anything special? Is there any?
Nothing special. It's just another input source. There's nothing special about Zapiti. So I would, I'd set up the Lumagen like I would set it up for any other input source. There's nothing that needs to be done that's like specific to that video input. There are definitely different input devices that have special stuff, but that wouldn't be one of them.
So I guess probably follow the same, I guess maybe call it best practice then, like have the device output the resolution of the source material and let the Lumagen scale. Have the device output the color space of the source content, so SDR or HDR, and let the Lumagen process. Output native frame rate for the content as well. All right, you got Easy HT Tech in the channel. Welcome. P Green 0001 says video processing helps every type of screen. Yep, so it's some good conversation on that. The aspect ratio, icing on the cake. Tyler says, can you compare Lumagen versus the MadVR and what they offer? So we did cover this.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I could talk a little bit to it. Um, I've had limited experience with MadVR. I did reach out to them when they first announced their product, trying to become kind of the same kind of thing. I said, hey, I'd love to look at the product, give you some insight on different things, especially having, so many years of background with video processing. But unfortunately, they didn't take me up on that. I even tried to become a dealer and they decided that they didn't want that. But I have done some jobs now with them. And honestly, from what I've seen, and I've also talked to many of the calibrators out in the field that are kind of the mainstay calibrators that I know, in that circle. They're more similar than dissimilar. Obviously, they're a PC. It's bigger. There's obviously little differences like that. But in terms of like what they offer in terms of features and stuff, I would say they're more similar than dissimilar. The things that come to right off the top of my head that would be different is the NV Extreme offers barrel distortion correction for anamorphic lenses. So if you happen to have a setup with a really short throw distance, you'll start getting a little bit of barrel distortion. So it'll start to curve because you're putting a lens in front of another lens and, like the size of it and things like that. So if that's something that bothers you in normal viewing, the Extreme offers that. I know they're talking about adding their own motion interpolation where they're going to do their own, which would mean that they're going to output at a fixed frame rate and then add frames into it. So if you're into frame interpolation and you think that maybe their processor might do a better job than what the TV does, I don't like motion interpolation. I did see a demo of theirs in rough alpha stage, and sure, it looked like it worked, but it still didn't look like anything that I would personally want. I've just never been a fan of frame interpolation. And then the other really only key differences that I can think of is obviously they have IP control because they are a PC. So they can do firmware updates and things like that via IP control. Outside of that, for I would say 99.999% of users, they're not going to really like, unless you did like side-by-side stuff. And in there, it's like, okay, you might like the Lumagen for this, you might like the NV for this. But I mean, in terms of like core features, aspect ratio stuff, deinterlacing, scaling, tone mapping, things like that, they both do the gamut of different things. I think the Lumagen is a little bit like, once everything's all set up, asks a little bit less of the end user. They have a thing where if you want to have like, oh, I want to use this feature versus this feature, they do what are called profiles, and you have to go into their menus, go to it, and then select the profile, kind of like the lens stuff with yours. Like you have to go in, go to the menu and select the lens thing and stuff like that, where Lumagen, almost everything is direct access right from the remote, including, like they don't do profiles, they do memories. So if you wanted to have like different setups for a different screen, 2 different displays, anything like that, you can instantly just go right to it by pressing a button. So there's some things that they don't do in that regard that makes it a little bit easier to use, I think, for the Lumagen. But for the most part, I think they're more comparable than not. Performance stuff, there's some people that say they like one better than the other. Like you're always going to get the mix of opinion on that. But again, from almost everybody I know that's like a professional video guy, they're like, the difference is so fleeting, it's not even worth talking about almost. It's just that they have that or they have that.
Yeah. Is it true to say that one of the things that MadVR had that is now on the Lumagen is the aspect ratio adjustment being instantaneous? That
Yes,
hadn't been the
correct.
case
So
until
Lumagen's
recently.
had aspect ratio support, like the switching and stuff like that for for a really long time. Um, Now, when it originally came out, it was a lot faster than it was up until just recently. But the problem with that is that, again, there's nothing in the content that tells the video processor what aspect it is. So it's not like, you're watching cable or you're watching a disc and it says, hey, Lumagen, I'm this aspect ratio. They don't do that. So the video processor has to detect the active frame in there. And there's a ton of things that can actually make that go away. So while you and I look at a screen and go, clearly that's scope, you have to remember everything like video processing wise is in the digital domain. So it's looking at the video levels like, okay, those bars are black, which would be digital 16, but there could be random noise in there that you're not seeing. There could be, all kinds of things that can trip that up. So if it acts instantaneously, again, if you want it to be instant, it has to make that decision instantly. Now, one big difference between Lumagen and MadVR is MadVR buffers frames. So because they're a PC, they have memory. So they buffer, I think it's like by default 6 frames, which then adds 6 frames of latency. So like if you have an NV, you have to have an audio processor that can delay audio enough to make up for 6 frames of delayed video. So however many milliseconds that is. And so I think their default is like somewhere around 200 something milliseconds. The Lumagen does everything within a single frame. So it doesn't have as much latency. So like if you want to be a gamer and use it for a gaming system like an Xbox or something, you can do that because there isn't all this inherent latency into it. Where if you're using like an NV, gaming's really hard and things like that. But so because they buffer so many frames, they have more frames before you see it to make that decision. So they initially did it, extremely fast. So then Lumagen started looking at it going like, okay, we could do that. We could always have made it faster. What we did was we made it, like take it, 2 to 3 seconds so that we absolutely knew what it was, like to try to, to make sure that this isn't some spurious thing that popped up or, or whatever else. So now they've been, they do the instant where again, it goes within a frame, and they actually made adjustments. So now it's instant where you can have like a half a second, which, is a half a second's 12 frames and 24 frames, a full second or even 2 seconds. So if you're somebody that doesn't care that it does it like that, and you're okay with waiting 1 second, it might be more reliable than it is an instant. But they've tried to make it where even instant is going to get it right 99.9% of the time and stuff. And I mean, there's been all kinds of stuff. We found out that like Apple TV, depending on if you start a movie, but then you fast forward a little bit, they're obviously buffering that, and different buffering things have different amounts of noise, and like that noise could trip it up. Or there's all kinds of stuff that, in a video signal that you never see that a processor will, and stuff like that. So that's why they weren't doing it before, but it's obviously something that a lot of people wanted. So now they do it.
All right. Tilipo08 asks, what does motion enhance do? That was referring.
I think he was asking for the
JVC.
JVC.
Yeah.
So the motion enhance on the JVC is a, I can't remember the name of it. It's basically how fast the panel refreshes itself. There's a specific name for it, and of course I'm drawing a blank on it, but yeah, it's just, PC monitors have that as well. It's how fast they refresh each of the pixels. And there is always the case that if you turn on something like that, it'll usually refresh faster. So motion might look a little bit cleaner, but there's also the chance that you might get a trailing artifact from it. But I haven't seen any. I generally, on the newer models, not on the older ones, so the NX and the NZ series, recommend people try it. Some people don't notice any difference at all. It's kind of content specific. There might be some content that would show it, and then 98% of the time you wouldn't even know it's on or off, and stuff. So I generally just tell people leave it in low.
EasyHT Tech was saying, I think that was in response to our conversation about the trim off, that sometimes the trim off can be very colorful in some rooms, but it's not necessarily, or maybe it's overkill in others.
And that always comes down to whoever you're working with as a dealer, or like somebody like me that's a consultant that's trying to help you make good decisions. Of hopefully you find somebody that's honest about like, what do you really need versus what do I really want to sell you. And stuff like that. So, obviously, a lot of dealers would just go, but this is the best and you have to have the best. Don't you want the best? If you don't get the best, as opposed to like, you have a 7.1.2 system. It's all, the speakers are all where they're supposed to be and stuff. You don't need an altitude 32 for that. You could probably get away with an AVM 70 for a fraction of the money and be delighted with it. So,
awesome. Mia Francis welcome says, it's a first world problem, but you have a theater. You're already far beyond what most people have, for sure, at this performance.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're after small things and optimizations. We're the tweakers of the tweakers in this community, in this group, for sure. hockey player, channel regular, and I think a client of yours as well, right? You did his.
I must have, because he said it, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have a client that's specifically named hockey player. So, but
Dave.
I imagine he is one of my clients, and I'm glad that he's happy with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
always look at all of this stuff, as a calibrator, even without video processors and stuff like that. My job, people always go like, what do you do as calibration? Obviously, I calibrate. But I always think of, the whole point of a theater, the whole point, I imagine you got into this the same reason I got into this. I love movies. I love watching movies. I love watching content. And at the end of the day, a theater is obviously a funner way to watch Top Gun than a little screen, little 13-inch TV like I grew up with and stuff like that. But it is kind of like what she said with the inconvenience thing. If I go to a movie theater, if I go right now tonight and say, hey guys, let's go see Top Gun Maverick, it's playing at the local Dolby Cinema. I go in there with my popcorn and I sit down and I want to watch it. I don't sit there and go like, do you think the projectionist remembered to put that setting in? Can somebody can he just bring up the menu? I just want to see if that setting is right, or why is this doing that, or why is that doing this? Like, you don't do that. You sit down and you watch it. You just this is the way it's supposed to look because that's the way they're showing it. So to me, calibration is about that. Like, it's hiring somebody that knows, hopefully, how to do all of that so that when you're watching it, it is exactly what it is supposed to be. If it looks a little bit different, that's because they mastered it different or whatever. But it's not something that you need to get your remote out like, oh, maybe that setting, I don't know. Is it this setting? And stuff like that. It takes it away so that you can sit down and enjoy it without the constant anxiety of is this right? Is that right? Yep. So, like a video processor, a perfect example is your setup. If you're watching it am I in the right zoom? Am I in this? Am I in that? No, the Lumagen knows what it's supposed to be. It'll do it. The calibration, all of those things. It's just loaded so that you can just the system. That way, the system gets out of the way of your enjoyment. You just sit down, push play, watch what you want to watch,
and
stuff like that. That's what these things should be about.
So
exactly. Yeah.
Really messes when you lock. So we'll talk about the idea of locking aspect ratio shortly here. Wayne Case. It sounds like he needs to reach out to Kris to finalize his setup. deepdiveav.com, right?
Yep. deepdiveav@gmail.com.
P Green 0001 made the comment about using Control 4 earlier, so he's using Serial.
Nice.
Tyler Walters. Here's the question of the day, right? TBD. Yeah, so like I commented, right? This is Matt's. This is going back to Matt. I think for one of his demo rooms that he's building for his business, he's setting up some new demo spaces. It came out of somewhere, personal room or something, and it's going into a demo room. So I would say I'm not sure. It will. I could say that I would love to have one. I think after the experience so far, it's just a matter of fitting it into other plans that I already had for the year, in terms of spending on gear and, and quite honestly, like channel revenue and other stuff like that. Cause a lot of my hobby money for this space is coming out of this endeavor now. So, and I've already bought a couple of things this year that I wasn't planning to. I didn't plan to buy the MDX 16, and that cost me some stuff. I wasn't planning to buy headphones, but I think the state of my ears are going to see me buying a pair of focals pretty soon. So, and I really want to get underway on the living room project, get the cabinet, get the stuff redone in there. So it's on a list, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. We'll see how well you do after you send it back to Matt.
That's the thing. Yep. That'll be the real litmus test of it, is after it's gone.
Yeah, I was going to say, once you have something, it's like anything else. Once you have a convenience thing and you get rid of it, you notice it a lot more than before you had it, so.
For sure. So Jordan's asking, can NLS be used to shrink horizontal? For instance, can I use it to fill a 235 when watching 240 movies without having the sides cropped? We have this set up, if I explain this right, that it's always basically trying to fill vertical.
We have yours set up that way. So again, like the Lumagen provides a insane amount of flexibility for almost every case. So in the case that he's talking about, he has a 235 screen. So a 235 screen is narrower than a 240. So if you watch 240, if everything was set up perfectly, like no overscan, anything, and you have a 235 screen, when you watch 240, there will be a tiny black bar above and below, right?
Hmm.
If everything is perfect. Okay. So he's asking, can it be used to shrink 235 and watching 240? So you wouldn't actually shrink. You would do the opposite. If you wanted the entire screen filled, I don't understand why you would think you would shrink for that, because again, with a 235 screen, 240 would be narrower. Therefore, you would have small black bars. And the Lumagen can be set up where if you have a 235 screen, it'll show 240 perfectly framed. So teeny tiny black bar at the top, teeny tiny black bar at the bottom. You can set it up where any aspect that is wider than 235 just fills the screen vertically. So what they would do is it would fill it to the top, and it would be just cutting off just a tiny bit at the side. Or you could use nonlinear stretch. I would not recommend using nonlinear stretch for that, but you could. And there's other things you can do. Again, it gives you an insane amount of different flexibility. But if if those little tiny bars bothered you, there's multiple ways to handle that situation. So.
Awesome. I want to jump back to this one more time too, and just comment specifically that one of the big questions that I wanted to answer for myself out of this demo is, what are all the things that having this would do for me? Because before experiencing it, especially with like pro help to making sure to get it set up the right way and maximize it, I talked in prior videos kind of thinking about what it may or may not do, and feeling I think kind of content with what I had. And then also not having had a processor and a lens, not being sure previously, like how much value does a processor add if you're not additionally adding a lens to it. And so I think the answer to that question now is quite a lot. And it's doing, now I understand how it's able to do a lot more for me, especially given some of the room logistics that I talked about earlier than I had conceived of before kind of going through this experiment. So preface it with that. So try and get through all these questions here. We'll catch up to real time, and then we'll get into some like full on demo, put some material, different types of material up, and take a look at like what it's doing, stuff like that. Just put the PSA out there. We've got a huge audience here tonight. That's awesome. We'll go for a while longer yet here. Please hit the like buttons. And of course, not required, but it is available. There are super chats, super thanks, stickers, and all of that stuff. And rest assured, anything that comes out of Techthusiasm's revenue goes right back into this room and my gear in these spaces so that I can make more content and experience more things, and all of that. So always very welcome. Jed Presley, what are the 3 to 4 most common projectors you see most frequently with calibrations? Just kind of asking, I think in general, what are the most popular projectors nowadays?
I would say with my clientele, JVC, Sony, Epson, and then you start getting into like, I don't know, Barco, BenQ, there's quite a few different DLP stuff, but I would say probably the biggest 3, like the overwhelming, is JVC, Sony, and Epson.
Yeah. The pillars of most projection setups nowadays.
Glad you liked it, Mike.
Did his room. Great calibration. The Lumagen was the most valued part. Sound off, Mike, if you want to qualify the valued part. What are the aspects that you're taking the most advantage of? So Julius, a follow-up similar question. Do you think we'll buy one now that I've experienced it? Talked about that a little bit. TBD. Okay, he already said that actually. So I used the sharpen feature for a while, found it added noise, subsequently turned that off. Whispered Scream says, do you know if there are any plans to simplify the menu system?
Depends on what you mean by simplified. I mean, it is already pretty simple. Like once you break down, like once you understand what you need to do, it is actually a pretty simple system. It's just it's a product that has solutions for a lot of problems, and not everybody has those problems. So they look at the menu and they go, "Oh, there's a lot of settings." Well, it's because it gives you a lot of things that you can do with it. Again, if it's set up properly, you should never really honestly go into the menu. I mean, there are a couple quick menus that have, more to do with like the day-to-day operation. Like, hey, I want to adjust the sharpening a little bit, or hey, I want to do this, that you don't even need to go into the menu system for. There's actually quick menus for those. But the main menu system, again, if it's set up properly by somebody that knows how to set it up, this is again designed as a custom install product.
Yeah.
You honestly should like really not ever have to go into that menu. But whether or not they're going to do something, we've talked about that before, having like a super basic menu, because there's already a thing in there with like menu modes for like, there's like a basic mode, and then there's one that unlocks some other things in there. We've talked about making like a super basic mode that just has, like this, like the most simple stuff in there. But I don't know if they're actually going to do that or not. Right now, they're working on other things. So.
JC Reynolds asks, what about 8K output with an NZ8, NZ9, with an NV Extreme, or even with the Lumagen? We talked a little bit about that last Sunday. Does that change anything? The 8K E shift in these processors?
Well, yeah, the only difference, the Lumagen's capped to an output of 4K. So if you happen to have an NZ8 or an NZ9, I technically an NZ7 actually it will accept an 8K input. They're not a true 8K projector, but they can accept an 8K signal. Yes, an NV can do that. You're talking about now scaling from 4K to 8K. I mean, I think you and I kind of talked about this the other night. Like you're at a pixel density now that I don't think it's going to matter. But I mean, if you just wanted to know that, hey, like this can output 8K versus that can output 4K. But again, when you're talking about a pixel density of 4K is already above the visuals, our visual acuity at any normal seating distance, what the JVC does when it does its E shift to scale from that, from that to that, I doubt there's absolutely any difference at all that you'd see. Plus it creates limitations also if you have like an anamorphic lens and things, because like the JVCs can't accept certain input frequency, input resolutions and stuff like that. So in general, I would just tell people, just if you want the 8K, just either have a native 8K source, which is only going to be a PC, and then what are you watching with it, and then, or the, just turn the E shift on and the JVC will do it itself. By the time that there's actually consumer 8K content to watch, that's like more than like, hey, there's this one video that I downloaded onto my PC or whatever that some guy made, then, I'm sure Lumagen will have a solution for that at that point.
Yep. So he says, thanks for the feedback. Yep. Thanks for joining. Just popped. Eric H said he's had a Lumagen for about a year now. Very happy with it. And it's continuing improvement, especially with the aspect switching. Awesome. Frankie, he called you a Jedi. He said you're the Lumagen Jedi in one of the comments. Very recent Lumagen adopter, been working on his own discovery learning. Cool. If you have any specific questions, knock them out. Pablo, the age-old question is whether he upgrades. Upgrade the projector. Yeah, I don't.
The nice thing about a video processor is you buy it, it'll work with the next projector and the next projector and the next projector. It's kind of like what you said, marry your screen, date your projector.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing applies to video processors. If you have scope screens, anamorphic lenses, spend a little bit more, get the lens that'll work with future models as opposed to the one that you save a couple bucks and it only works with the one you have now, things like that. So I always look at anything like that. If it's something that's a mainstay item, I would rather spend a little bit more money and get it, the one that's going to benefit down the road. So, amplifiers, speakers, or whatever, just buy the good ones the first time and ride it out.
Yeah. I'm closer to drop the money on a Lumagen than an NZ9. I know that there's a big price gap there.
Yeah.
But you know, a Lumagen plus an NZ8 comes out. It should probably even comes out a little bit cheaper.
Yep.
So, yeah, we'll see. There's other things that the projector can do for me. That brightness would be nice, probably. And then going to the 9 and the being able to fill more screen is a big draw, but that's a big spend. So we will see. Sammy, channel regular, welcome and hey. PG P. I keep saying PG P Green 0001. Question for Kris. Calibrated my system many years ago, still on the same bulb, as I don't use this on a daily basis. But once I do a bulb change, should he calibrate again?
So you should have calibrated quite a while ago. So I think a common misconception in calibration is like once you get it calibrated, it's always calibrated. That is anything but the truth, and especially with a bulb-based projector. So bulbs change their property over time. They are the main light source. Remember, everything is based on red, green, and blue. The properties of that red, green, and blue were changing all the time. So with a bulb-based projector, I would tell people you probably don't want to go more than maybe like 800 to 1,000 hours at most before, if you want to keep a calibrated image. And stuff like, it might even be a little lower than that. You know, it also depends on what, are you at the beginning of the bulb range or towards the middle or towards the end of that bulb range? But once you change a bulb, you definitely want to calibrate again, because it's a completely different bulb. And even if it's the same projector, like that bulb is going to be different than this bulb, and things like that. So yes, the answer is yes.
So just for reference here too, this is my original NX7 bulb, and I just turned a little over 1,000 hours. Although I learned, we had a party on Sunday, and birthday party for the kids, and I think my in-laws came in here. My father-in-law was showing my mother-in-law. I guess she never realized we've been in this house so long. We've had this theater for a while. She'd never actually poked her head in here and taken a look at it. And they ended up turning the room on, because I've got like a double tap on the light switch to turn the room on. And he didn't mean to do that. And then my wife tried to turn it off. And anyway, I think the JVC sat on for a day or so. I don't know why. I must have checked its settings, see why it didn't turn off.
Yeah, one of the actual recent feedbacks I've had to JVC is I wish they had so they have a timer, but it's a sleep timer where you put it on, like let's say you put it on for 60 minutes. It doesn't matter if you're using it or not. It will turn off at 60 minutes.
Yeah.
I want them to add one that you can turn on that says if there's no signal for X amount of time, turn off. Yep. They don't have that. And that I've done the same thing where I've turned, like in my Harmony, I said, turn everything off. And for some reason, the JVC didn't take it, but the screen was black enough that I didn't know that the projector didn't turn off. So I just happened to leave the room or whatever. And then I come in the morning and I'm like, wow, my theater room's a lot warmer than I'm used to. And I'm like, oh, the projector's been on all night long, you know? So yeah, that's a feature that I frankly, I'm really surprised they don't have that, where it's just, if no signal is present, turn off after 30, 60, 90 or whatever. I would love that feature.
Yeah, I agree. That would have saved a day of hours, 30 hours or so probably on the projector. So Mike is from the prior comment, his most valued part of his Lumagen is tone mapping. Hockey player, thanks so much. Super chat. Awesome friend of the channel there. Somebody that I'm getting to know a little bit from our conversations on the side.
Nice.
Mike asking, what's your opinion on the sharpen function, the Lumagen sharpen function?
I don't know if he's asking you that or me. Again, it is a sharpen feature. They have different settings depending on if the input's 4K, if the input is 2K. It's, you know, like any kind of enhancement or sharpening feature or something. If you push that, exit out of that and just push the right arrow. So you can see here, you're sending in a 4K source. So Darby is on the right side, and it says it's not enabled because it's a 4K signal. And then in your case, it's set at 2 and 1 and high. So it's just a sharpening filter. It can be adjusted to anything you want. You can turn it off. The the sensitivity thing is just in like what it tries to sharpen and things like that. Some people really like a sharpened kind of over processed image. Some people want, you know, a real natural image. It gives you the flexibility to do what you want. You could try it compared to what the display has. You could just turn it off or whatever. Those are all seasoned to taste. You know, it's like frame interpolation. You know, some people just love it, you know, and other people are like, you know,
Yeah.
I look at all that stuff as just like, you know, at the end of the day, if you like steak sauce on your steak, there you go. If you like salt and pepper, there you go. You know what I mean? Some people like that stuff. Some people don't. You want pineapple on your pizza? Put pineapple on your pizza. You know, like, yeah, it's just something there that if you want to try it, you can. If you don't want to try it, you won't. If you're going to make adjustments to it, you should never use static images or static patterns because, again, those are usually near Nyquist, and you will see, like, I always love it when people want, like, I put this test pattern up with these like single resolution lines, and there's like a little bit of ringing. And I'm like, well, yeah, because it's a Nyquist pattern, but nothing you watch will ever be Nyquist because there's motion resolution, compression, blah, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the content is compromised. Test patterns are not. So all of enhancements are meant to try to kind of undo that compromise. So if you're watching something and you feel like it's a little soft, turn on the sharpening and see if it makes it subjectively better. You know, if you don't like it, then turn it off. So, I mean,
Yeah,
again, image enhancements are to enhance images that you may not like the way that they look without it. You know, the whole purist thing of like, you don't want any kind of artifacts or anything in a test pattern is, again, you do not watch test patterns. They're awesome for evaluating displays, but they have little to do a lot of times with the content that you're watching and how you see it in motion, you know, from a viewing distance. So,
yep. So another question on the calibrations, how long for a 4100? So that's a laser. Is there a rule of thumb on a laser?
So a laser really isn't any different than a bulb. You know, again, it does go slower in terms of the light output, but you also have to remember it is not, you know, so a 4100 is a blue phosphor laser, right? So it's a single blue laser hitting a yellow phosphor that then goes through a polarizer and then creates the other colors, right? But you have to remember that an LCOS display, which is what a JVC is an analog backplane. So it wears over time. The actual imaging chips do. The phosphor wears over time and things like that. So I'm seeing just as much, you know, like change in, you know, the red, green, blue balance, things like that with a laser projector. You know, I have a 4100 upstairs than I did with my NX9 or, you know, the ones that I had before that and stuff. I'm not seeing anything. Now, if you have a DLP with a 3 RGB laser system, completely different. DLP is, you know, is just literally a mirror. There's no wearing. There's no wear element there. And, you know, RGB lasers, you know, as long as all three of those lasers are wearing at the same amount, you know, that's the thing that you'd have to know is, does the red, because they're different wavelengths, they're a different laser diode. So are those diodes, you know, moving in the same direction? You'd have to trend it and know whether or not, you know, those things actually, how often do they really skew enough to be visible and things like that. But at least with like the Sony and the JVC laser projectors, I'm not really seeing any difference in how long they hold their calibration compared to the bulb counterparts of before. So it'd be about the same. I'd say, you know, 500. If you really want it to always be right, you probably start thinking about it every 500 hours, but you could probably go as much as 800 to 1,000. It just, you know, everybody thinks they're a lot more sensitive to calibration, you know, drifting than they really are. You know, it's another thing that like people get focused on numbers that I don't think they really understand, or they're like, oh, but I heard this, you know, and stuff. And I'm a calibrator. I'm the one trying to sell calibrations. And I tell people like, just relax a little bit, you know? So.
All right. One more super chat. Gopinath Makala. Thank you so much. Channel regular. Love it. I love doing streams like this where we're really like showing something, doing, you know, really, really hopefully creating content and having a conversation that helps people make a real decision, you know, or make a decision confidently with their systems. All right. So I think we're pretty well caught up.
Okay.
Let's think, how do we want to show this off? What can we do? particularly some of the aspect ratio management and things. Let me first of all make sure to mute. And we're live. I'll probably have to go back and blur some stuff out.
So let's talk a little bit about the peculiarities of yours. As you said, you do not have, your projector is limited, so you're not filling your full frame. They're not really seeing that because it's dark enough in that room that they don't really notice it, but you're not filling your full frame. So the first thing that we had to do with your system was we didn't set it up as like a simple 2-3. Yeah, you can see to the right there, like where it says John Wick is cut off, and then you can see his frame. So he's not filling his full width because he physically cannot fill that. The projector is incapable of that because of the throw distance from it to there. Your size screen and your throw, it just won't. So it's, we are using the full width of the 4096 panel. The Lumagen is outputting 4096. So what the first thing you and I did was I was like, okay, well, let's not like oversimplify and say, oh, you have a 235 or a 24 screen. Let's find out what your screen really is. So remember, we physically got out a piece of a measuring tape, and I had you measure the width versus the height. And we determined that you were like, I think you were like a 2.2 screen.
2.2, yep. Like 219 or something. Yep.
So then I told the JVC, I told the Lumagen, hey, you're using a 2.2. And then based on 4096, I put in what the shrink rate was for that, because the way the Lumagen works is if you tell it 2.2, it just tries to fill the full vertical raster like you're using a lens, or like whether it's a vertical compression or a horizontal expansion lens. So then I had to tell it like, oh, no, you're not. So, to take that space that's like, overshooting and shrink it back down into there so that the aspect is correct. So that's the first thing that we did. We established what your aspect ratio was. So the Lumagen saying, okay, this is the space that I have to work in. And from there, it does everything else by itself. Like we told it that, hey, I want it to show whatever you're watching. I want to show it properly. So if you watch something that was 16:9 or 4:3, those black bars would get bigger on the sides, because remember, we're always changing width. You're using a constant height system. So the only thing that ever changes is the width of the image. And then you could tell it like, no, I just want everything to fill it. That's what NLS is for. I mean, there's plenty of options for all of that stuff. But first we established what the screen was. Then we told it, I want it to instantly change to whatever the aspect is of the input source, from 4:3 to out. And then, and in your case, we're making it where anything that is wider than 2.2 will still fill your full raster. So if you played something that was 235 or 240 or anything like that, you'll still have your full height. You'll just crop a little bit off the sides to maintain that, so that we're not doing any kind of like image skewing or anything like that. We could have done that, but that's not what we did, and stuff like that. But most people don't have a 2.2. Most people have a 2.4 or a 235, and that's usually not an issue. And then again, all you would be seeing is the change if you wanted it to preserve aspect ratio. Yep. So, but again, that's the flexibility of it.
Those side gaps with this now are about a little less than 5 inches, I think, when I measured them, 4 or 5 inches. I'm probably overdue. I'd imagine for less than $200, maybe even closer to $100, maybe. Well, let's call it 200. I bet would be my guess. I could probably get a couple of little vertical masks from Seymour, because I believe they make custom sized masks, and they would pop right up there and velvet out, or block out those very edges of the screen. So I'll probably end up doing that sooner than later. Even without the Lumagen, I still zoom, and then I use the aspect zoom to fill the same physical width of the screen on, on a wider aspect ratio content. I kind of feel like if I don't buy the masks, it's a motivating factor to try to solve it by putting image there some other way. But the reality is, I'm probably some time away from doing something that would get me image there, which would mean knocking stuff out and moving the projector into the closet, making a projection room out of the closet in the back of the room, or NZ9ing the theater. So I probably should do that sooner than later anyway. I forgot the other thing I was going to say, but
if you want to go into something like, let's just go to the left there and select Dunkirk, and then just hit play. So Dunkirk, you can see it's listed as a 235, but this one, as far as I know, in Kaleidoscope, it's don't do a scene, just play the movie. I'm pretty sure with the Kaleidoscope, this one has a shifting aspect ratio. There, with Kaleidoscope, there's very few movies that do, but I think this one does. I might be wrong though.
I've got Maverick on here, so if we need.
Yeah, Maverick does it.
So now we're syncing.
Yeah, it's just
frame
now
rate.
you're changing to a different frame rate, and it's
right.
Yep.
So it was being, or the native top of the screen is higher. Looking at that as well, actually, I was noticing it. I could see a little of that in the Velvet.
So just hit pause.
Yep, boom.
Okay, so you can instantly see how it changed the aspect right there, because this does have a shifting aspect ratio. So if it didn't, so one thing to know with Kaleidoscope is they always put all of their icons and stuff in the aspect of the content. So if this movie was being shown in scope, that pause would not see how it actually extends higher than the frame. It would be in the frame at all times. But because they do a different aspect, so now unpause, and you see it instantly goes to the aspect that it should be. Now, if you hit the OK button on the Lumagen, go ahead and hit play. Yeah, and then just hit OK on the Lumagen. Now hit OK again, and then one more time. And all this is info right here. No, but again, the Lumagen, you see, like as soon as you brought something outside of the frame, it instantly went to make sure you could see what that is. So if you had like a pop-up menu or anything like that, it would just instantly go and give you the ability to see that. And then as soon as you remove it, it goes back to whatever is the proper framing for whatever it is you're watching. But again, if you went to a sticky aspect, see how it didn't change now?
Yep.
So now it's ignoring any kind of changes, and it will stay that way at this frame for the entire rest of the movie, unless you decide to do something that interrupts the signal, push stop, go to a different, input or anything like that. Then it'll just go back to being an auto, where it'll change whatever you want. You don't have to come out of it. But this is just a way that if you want to watch a movie and you don't want it to change, for the few movies that do this, you can just lock an aspect ratio. You could have even locked 16:9, and then you see like what it does, because remember, all this content is designed around a 16:9 viewing environment. So you would see that, if you wanted it, you could see it where it's doing the changes like it would on a regular TV. If you wanted it to, you could mask it down. So like a movie that I actually do that with is that new one, Everything Everywhere All at Once. They made that specifically for a 16:9 screen because they slowly come out of aspects. They're not going boop, boop, like this is, or Top Gun is. They're literally doing these slow things where they're changing the frame. So in that case, in my room, I masked to 16:9 and lock it to 16:9. And then I'm seeing it the way they wanted you to see that, because it's a very specific instance, and this works fine on a 16:9 display, but it doesn't make sense for a scope screen, so I'd rather watch it the way he presented it in theaters outside of an IMAX theater. Christopher Nolan, if he wanted it to be 16:9 all the time, he would have framed it that way for theaters as too. Like, it's not like theaters have to be 2.4 and stuff like that. So, and most of these movies, Nolan being the exception, are all shot with digital cameras. So all it is the matting. It's, they're just opening up the mat, so that IMAX can say, hey, we're taller. What all they did was, if you ever watch anything when they're making a movie, they have their 16:9 screen, and then you'll see the safe markers for the scope. And all you're doing is getting that little up, above and below. So now they're just more careful about not getting a boom and stuff in there. But at the end of the day, it's just an open mat version. I mean, pretty soon with the way people are going gaga over that, we're going to go back to pan and scan. So it's like, oh no, I have black bars. I don't understand why, but I hate them.
We're going to watch them in a vertical strip portrait phone mode.
Right. Yeah. Oh my God.
So we can take all our scope screens and turn them 90 degrees.
Yeah. Turn them 90 degrees.
So to get out of this, I go back to auto aspect enable.
You can. Yeah. And then just push play, because right now you're back into the normal framing. So the Lumagen does all that work for you. You just push play. And then if you don't want it to switch, you can lock it. You can do NLS. Like I know there was a video with like MadVR from some Australian guys where they were doing Interstellar and they were using like nonlinear stretch for that, which to me is like awful. Like you're literally taking this thing and doing all this stretching so that it would fill the screen. Again, in that case, I would just lock the aspect ratio, but you can do that with the Lumagen. There's a button that says NLS. You want to use it? Push it, So if you're like, if you have a scope screen and you're watching football and you want it to fill it all, your whole screen, just press NLS. It turns on NLS. You want it off, press NLS. It's off. You don't have to go into a menu. You don't have to select a profile or anything. You just turn it on when you want, turn it off when you don't want it. So this is
so this is a 185 movie.
So if you so just leave it in that. So push play. And then right next to that 2, 3, unless it's an emissive display. And even an emissive display, it might scatter inside the glass layer. It's unlikely, but you know what I mean? But that's why, like, again, if you want to spend the extra money and have, like not even first world problems, you buy a masking system, and then it frames it all perfectly and stuff. So if there's something out there, there's a solution for it. So, but it's just, how much money do you want to throw out?
Exactly. And I think Seymour just came out. Was it out of Cedia? They
have the ones that drop down.
Yep, the variable drop down.
It's not a variable, so it's only a one fixed aspect because it's basically like a blind. It's this like a two little blind.
Okay.
Super wide. So it's like the screens that you used to, like you could have it in full scope, or they drop down and it'd be 16:9 because they don't have something that can go like that. That would have to come from the sides. So like my screen is a variable mask, so I can do everything from scope down to 4:3. But a lot of the ones that come down like that, it's like it's either one or the other. And like JVC, like for example, they have anamorphic lens processing if you have an anamorphic lens, but they only process for either 16:9 or fully open. Well, what do you do for all the aspects in between that? Like the Lumagen will frame for anything, even if you have a lens in place. So you don't have to sit there and be like, well, this is 2.0. Should I watch it in scope or should I watch it in 16:9? Which one's less distracting? All of that goes away. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
hold on one second. Chat saying we lost. Did we get taken down? Are we still on?
It says live in the top left. Is there a limit in
unavailable,
YouTube?
Suspended. Oh wait.
Is it because you were playing Transformers? Is that a copyright violation?
Let me see. Hold on. I'm trying to figure out. Okay, we're back.
Did it really go away?
It went stream unavailable for let's see how long. Right after. Guess I let it play too long. I should have stopped it. Right after they got on Astro Train.
Oh, that must be like something from in the movie.
Yeah. And then we're back.
Gotcha.
Okay, we're back now. Whoops. I'll have to figure that out after the fact. Hopefully everybody's super chats didn't just go into a black hole. Pavel is asking, and NZ. So this is always the big question for projection, right? And how to spend your money. Lesser projector and add the bits and pieces, or more powerful premium projector.
So this would be system specific. So what's the limiting factor? So an NZ8 with a Panamorph lens will be roughly the same amount of light output as an NZ9, because the Panamorph adds about 25% of extra light, and NZ9 is about 25% brighter than an NZ8. So the lens versus the NZ8 with a lens is going to be roughly the same as an NZ9 without a lens. So if you need light, again, a video processor can't add light. It can't make a projector brighter than it is. And if light is your limiting factor, then, if your budget is like, hey, I can either do this or this, that's when a lens versus, so an NZ8 with a lens versus an NZ9, I mean, depending on what you're getting the lens for, the combination of those two's cost versus an NZ9. Now, granted, an NZ9 has a better lens than an NZ8, and you'd be able to run at a lower light output, right? Like, because you'll have different headroom and things like that. So you have to look at those things. So a lens is all about light. Do you need the light or do you not need the light? If you need the extra light, a lens adds headroom for light, or that's what you should be looking at a lens for. Now, a video processor is, like, okay, well, if you have a scope screen, do you want to deal with lens shifting, blah, 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 blah. If you have an anamorphic lens, do you want to have to deal with their anamorphic modes? And then again, you get better calibration with a Lumagen because there's more granularity in their calibration because they have LUTs and things like that. You have the different tone mapping, which is better than the JVCs. Now, JVC's tone mapping is pretty good, but it's not quite as good as Lumagen's is, especially with difficult material and things like that. So, again, like they start adding up, so it's just a matter of, is there enough value in that for you? But usually when somebody's asking me an NZ8 versus an NZ9, a lot of that has to do with how big their screen is. Do they need the light? Would they benefit a lot from a bigger lens because they have a big screen, things like that. The NZ8's a really, really good projector. So again, it's not a simple, this versus that. Never really is it?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I saw one here. Do you recommend a Lumagen for a UST projector? Again, like I haven't really messed around with UST projectors that much. I'm honestly not that big a fan of them in times that I have used them. But it would be the same benefit case. It would just depend on what the processing was like in that UST projector. How good is their tone mapping with HDR? How good is, their different things like that. UST projectors are usually not scoped, so obviously the aspect ratio stuff doesn't really apply. But if you didn't like the way it was doing with tone mapping, with HDR content, things like that, then something like a Lumagen might be able to help with that.
I'm going to try and pull up one more.
So he said Mission Impossible Fallout is one for demonstrating. So again, like if you look at, like, there was some pre-production stuff that was put out about Fallout. Fallout was shot on a digital. I think it was shot on the Alexa. It's the IMAX badged Alexa LF camera. So it's a 1.7 a 1.9 sensor. So it's, again, 4096. So the IMAX sequences in that are just, again, all they are is open matte. So if I was going to watch Fallout, I would lock the aspect ratio. But if you wanted to see it instantly change between aspect ratios, that would be one you could do it with. You could do it with like Transformers. You could do it with Maverick, a bunch of these other ones.
So here's
I just don't like the idea of something sitting there switching all the time in front of me.
Right. So
I just lock it. Yeah.
Here's an example of those control problems, right? So I switched over to the Apple TV, try and keep a little less plain video. I thought that might be a problem tonight, but so be it. So anyway, I switched over to the Apple TV. I just grabbed a movie in my recent list, purchase list, Black Adam, obviously wider than widescreen scope aspect ratio here in the Lumagen is popping us in. But as soon as I tap, because I need to access the controls on the bottom of the screen, much of which, right, or some portion of which down there is in the black space. If I was zooming, this would all be cut in half, right? You wouldn't be able to see, you couldn't see the tags. As soon as that menu goes away out of that space, boom, we're right back. We're right back to filling that instant as I, oh, darn it. That was supposed to just get rid of the text. Let me restart it again.
Oh, you had just gone out of the movie completely?
Yeah, the back button, when you have the playback overlay on the Apple TV and you hit like menu back, it should just always dismiss.
Take the menu away. Yeah, dismiss it. But it doesn't always, yeah.
No,
sometimes
or maybe I waited
back.
just a fraction of a second too late. All right. So there we are again. It'll go away on its own in a second. But we can see info, we can see chapters, and then boom, as soon as that text is out of the black space, we're back up. So that's definitely a superior, convenient experience over zooming, when all of that stuff would be cut and you wouldn't be able to see
So
it.
another thing, again, like I've been using this for a long time. One feature I use it for that, a lot of people will be like, I would never use that. But so on your Lumagen remote, press the button that says 16:9. It's like just below the middle part.
Yep.
Now see how it locked 16:9. So now we locked it, right? But what this does is, like, a lot of times I see people that are watching like a scope movie and they're like, oh, the blacks in this don't look good. Maybe it's my processing or whatever. And you find out that, like, this gives you a sanity check. If you push 16:9, now all the way around, because you're framed, is the black of the projector. And that black is the black floor of the projector. So then you have something to compare to in the frame. So if you're watching something that you're like, God, the blacks in this, don't look that good, is there something wrong? It would show you, is it the projector or is it the content? If the content has a raised black floor because they mastered it that way, you would instantly see that, like, oh, they actually raised the blacks in this. That's why it doesn't look as black as I remember, because now you're seeing the black of the projector versus the black of the content. So like even here, like, let's say his suit was black or supposed to be black, you can clearly see that it's not. So that's, again, like, that's just something I do because I look at a lot of content, I test content, but that's like a quick way that I could just instantly change to any aspect ratio I want. And then if you just hit enable, again, it'll go back to being an auto aspect ratio. But that's just a nice thing sometimes for that sanity check where you're like, oh, the blacks look weird in this. Is that the content or is that the projector? Well, you could tell instantly which one it was.
Yeah. So. And you can see, I think, I'm looking at the screen, if folks look real close, like, you can see the delineation between the black field of the projector and that couple of 5 inches between the projector, the image space, and the velvet, and then the velvet. There's a slight difference right to the shade of those regions.
Yeah. And that's just because the velvet is pretty much, perfect black, and the JVC is only going to be so good. It's better than, most of what's out there, but there's still a lot of black left on the table, I'd say.
Right. So super chat. Thanks so much, Brian. I really enjoy Brian's channel, TVs, video games, and stuff like that. I'd really love to. We need to get on a stream and chill some time together. So super awesome, super appreciated. Jordan asked, if I'm using a Lumagen with an X790 older projector, does it make sense to upgrade to the NX7 for movie-only viewing? Maybe not. You can get more life out of that.
If I am using a Lumagen with an X790, does it make sense to upgrade to the NX7 for music only? So the X790 is not a native 4K. So, again, you get into that thing of like, well, what does the NX7 bring over the X, 790? So it's going to be brighter. It's going to be native 4K. There's just little differences like that. Is it going to be a huge difference? Probably not. But I've rarely had a client that's gone from an older JVC to a newer JVC that has been like, oh, I didn't really notice much difference. I shouldn't have done that. So, the Lumagen would still be just as valid for the NX7 as it was for the X790. But you're changing projectors. So what you really need to concentrate on there is, like, what does an NX7 bring to the table that the X790 doesn't? So it's native 4K, things like that.
Yeah. One of the big, if you didn't have the processor, I think it would be a bigger upgrade, because
it would, because the HDR processing is a lot better. Yeah. But in that case, like, if he was going from an X790 and he didn't have a Lumagen, I would say not to go to an NX7. I would be looking at an MP5 or one of the NZ models at this point. Like, unless you're trying to, stay in a budget and looking at the used market, the NX7 is still a great projector, but
Mhm.
If you're going to buy a new projector, I usually recommend trying, like, there's even
Get
between the
current model.
NX and the NZ, there's things that are worth doing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, on that roadmap, if it were me, I would probably, again, as long as the Lumagen is solving other problems for you, like we were talking about, right? You have a scope screen and you're getting some other benefits and stuff out of it. If you've got an X790 today, maybe you go Lumagen and then you go NZ7 in this path a little while later.
yeah, my number one consulting advice to everybody, because, like, again, I do a lot of consulting. The first thing I always tell people, 'cause I feel like, again, in this hobby, and I'm sure it's like this for every hobby, is people just want to, want something new. Like, there's the fun of something new. The grass is always greener, the honeymoon period, whatever you want to call it, right? But I try not to look at things like that. I look at, like, hey, I'm thinking about buying another projector. It's like, well, what is it you don't like about your projector? Is when you're watching something, is there something that bothers you? Oh, I feel like it could be sharper, or I feel like it could be brighter. Okay, well, that's an issue. So, like, well, let's look at what your options are. So if you were going from an NX7 to an NZ7, they're the same light output, pretty much. So it's like, okay, you're not getting that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. What are you getting? Yeah.
what when you're watching a movie in your system, what is taking you out of that experience? Is there something that's physically taking you out of the experience? Like, oh, this, I get this weird hum over here, or I get a rattle over there, or I have this weird hot spot on the screen there, or I have, what I mean? Things that take away from your enjoyment when you watch something. Those are the things that I try to key in on when I consult with somebody. Like, instead of just like, hey, I'm thinking about buying a new amp. Well,
Mm.
what's the amp going to get you? Well, mine's 100 watts per channel, and this is 125 watts per channel. Well, you're never going to notice that, something like that. But, what is it about your system that made you think that you want that? Is there something that you feel is lacking? Well, actually, that has to do with this, or things like that. So that's what I try to concentrate on. Is I tell people, like, put your money toward the things that were actually, like, take away distractions. And if there are no distractions and you're like, no, when I put on a movie, it's great. And, like, dude, keep riding that train.
Yeah.
So don't fall into the trap of everybody else's insecurities of, like, oh, I gotta have this, I gotta have that. Like, if you're loving what you got, just keep loving it.
Yeah.
Until it, ride it till it's broken or something starts bothering you. Because, I mean, again, the tech, video and stuff like that, like, we've had the same video quality for a while now, and content's getting better in terms of compression and things. But I mean, we've been at 4K for a while now, and even HD for most people looks pretty good. Again, depending on your viewing distance and things like that, it's amazing how good that quality is. I would venture to say that if I did a get together here on my setup and I started, like, doing that thing like they do at tech shows, where it's like, show a clip, show a clip, show a clip, show a clip. I would venture to say if I mixed half of it with 4K and half of it with 1080,
Yeah.
most people would know the difference.
Might not
I could
see.
tell them that we're watching 4K HDR for everything on the projector, and they'd probably believe me. You know what I mean? Because, if you got good, a lot of times the limitation is how they shot the movie, how good the compression was done, how good the master is, how good the cameras were. I feel like now we're getting to the point now where you notice that way more than you start noticing the differences between, displays and stuff, unless there's, like, big differences between them. Like, you have a really low contrast display or something like that.
Mm.
But I feel like a lot of the things that people key in on are limitations of the capture and production and stuff, more than the display technologies.
Question from Steve. So he says, the Lumagen will provide better opportunities for color correction, but expertise aside from yourself is extremely limited. How do we accomplish that? I think so. Asking basically, how does an end user get more out of buying a device like this?
So one, buying it from somebody that's going to actually support the product, making sure that it's maximized as much as it can. So obviously, if you have somebody that's local that really knows the product, that can do a calibration or whatever, that would be ideal. If you can't have that, having somebody that can do, like, a full setup, like, again, like the services I offer, when somebody buys it from me, I set it up before it ships. So if I can't, like if Jeremy decided to buy a Lumagen from me, you're in North Carolina, right?
Michigan.
Michigan. Wow, that was close, right? So if you're in Michigan and I'm in Seattle, I can set up, I always set up every Lumagen before it ships. So it arrives as plug and play as possible for him. Now, obviously, he's not getting the benefit of a true calibration, which, requires instrumentation and measurements and things like that. So I would tell him, like, either try to find a calibrator, I could recommend one, or if I was going to do a tour that can do those functionality of it. There are some out there, but obviously that's just, try to make sure that you're working with people that can give you the best results depending on the limitations that you have. And I try to offer solutions for that with remote calibrations, things like that. But, again, there's just some people that, they just don't have access to things like that. You could always try to calibrate yourself, but, there's quite a learning curve to calibration, and then making sure you have the right instrumentation. And I mean, I'll be frank, there's a lot of pro calibrators out there that can't do, projectors, probably as well as they should be doing them, or things like Lumagen and stuff like that. So you got to be careful of that, like to just try to randomly do it. There's a good chance. But the nice thing is that, again, like, somebody asked before, what are the projectors I see the most? Epson, JVC, Sony. They're kind of in that price window that the enthusiast goes for. Most of those are pretty good out of the box. I mean, in terms of a consumer grade display, they're not too bad. So you can get away with a lot. They don't have like errors like we've seen in the past if they're set up in the right modes, it's like a flat panel. You could turn it on and set it to this mode and it's horrible. You know what I mean? Yeah. But then there's another mode that's really, really good. So, that's why I talked about before, like if I set up ones for people, I always tell them use this mode, these settings, blah, 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 because I know that's about the best you can get short of calibration. Mm-hmm. So I at least try to point them in that direction. But obviously instrument and calibration, the Lumagen does offer, better calibration prowess for gamma, grayscale, color, and all those things. So if you want to take full advantage of that, just make sure you're using somebody that's familiar with it and stuff like that. So unfortunately, there isn't somebody like that everywhere, but there are people that travel around that could probably help you out.
All right.
Did we catch up on all the questions? Wow.
Yeah, we're up to date. We lost a little bit with the blackout, but we still got a pretty good sized group out there. So either we've done a great job covering things, or but if anybody has questions, we'll probably wind it down here momentarily. So any last comments, any last questions? Give it a minute. Post away. We'll hit those and we call it a night here in a few. P Green. I think he asked us a little while ago. And I think we might have.
You're already there. You should try to get it calibrated as soon as you can.
Then that might be the last one on that bulb then, probably.
Yeah. So with bulb hours, it just depends because everybody's system's different. So like, let's take your system, for example, Jeremy, you have a really big screen. So at that many hours, you probably are really low on light output. But, this guy might have a 110-inch screen and he had a ton of headroom to start with. So at 2,000 hours, he's still sitting pretty good in terms of light output because he just doesn't have a big screen. So that's why I said, like, it's never as black and white as everybody says. Like somebody goes, oh, I have 1,100 hours on my bulb. Should I change it? And I'm like, well,
maybe.
Like that's just one piece of information that doesn't mean anything. I always tell people ignore the numbers unless the bulb's failed. It's just, is the image, can you still make the image as bright as you want it to look, or is it just starting to look too dim and dull? If it's too dim and dull, no matter what you do, you probably need to change the bulb. But in this case, if he's looking for accuracy, he's well past when he should have had it calibrated. So I would say if you want it to be accurate, you need to get your calibration as soon as you can, from whether it's from me or anybody else. So.
Yeah, I'll have to see how things go with regards to either upgrades or I've got another bulb sitting in the other room. So I could technically swap mine at any time. And even, Before I do that though, I think I really for the science, I want to buy a lux meter or a light meter, because I want to see. I'll be curious to see what is this one actually throwing when I take it out, and then what is the new bulb.
So your screen's pretty big. Is yours the Seymour screen?
Yep.
Are you using the XD material?
Yes.
Okay, so I bet you with your size screen and that projector, you're probably roughly in nits. You're probably, are you running full out, high lamp and everything?
High lamp. Yes.
Aperture fully open. I bet you're about 60 to 70 nits at best.
What is
Now
that?
that's nits. That's reflected light back at you. So like SDR, general movie theater, if you go to the local Cineplex, they're running about 40 to 50 nits. But you also have to remember that's a big screen, so your field of view is bigger, so it looks brighter than it really is. And then the mastering standard for SDR is 100 nits. So, generally most people, when I calibrate, they like most people just generally like a little bit of a brighter image. So I'd say anywhere between like 75 to 100 nits. So you would have been at the lower end of that to begin with. The XD helps you because you're about a 1.0 gain, but your screen is really big, and that's a weave, so you're losing light to the weave. So it's not going to take long for your bulb to get to the point where you're just like, it's not. But you're also in a really dark room, so you acclimate to that, so it looks brighter to you.
Yeah, that probably saves it, helps it a lot. We had when I had I had the LS 12,000 in here for a little while, and we were shooting that off against this, and I had two little get-togethers. A couple of guys came over each time, and half the screen was this NX7 with not too many less hours than it has on it right now, probably 900-ish hours maybe, or in the 900s. And then the other half of the screen being the LS, which is whatever, a 3000 spec 3000 lumen or ish, 2800, something like that, light cannon. I think when we measured it, it was putting out twice as much light. I want to say we measured this at a 1,000 lumens at the screen, and the NX was like 22 or something like that. And still everybody, the five guys or so that were here over the 2 days, everyone unanimously preferred the NX7's picture, even though the Epson was throwing that much more light, because of the other factors and stuff like that. But like, I don't feel that I'm dim. But that said, it'll still be interesting to see what a new bulb. I don't have any other frame of reference because I've been using this one for so long now. This projector's been in here, 3 years. I bought it right when the NXs came out. So it's probably 4 years old now, or 4 years old this spring. Yeah, no audio on Kris. Looks like he's. I don't. Can you say something? No, not hearing you. There you go.
Try again. Hear me now?
Yes, there you go.
Oh, it was weird. Like the program muted me, even though I'm still using the mic. I had to switch my headphones, but that makes sense. So yeah, you add 1,000 lumens. Lumens measurement just tells you pretty much what the projector does. Now, obviously, you can do the math to try to figure out based on your screen size and gain what your nit value is. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what matters is how much light's being reflected back at you. Like a lumens measurement just tells you what so people go like, oh, I heard the JVC's 3000 lumens, but it's like, well, that's in its full output, not calibrated and everything else. Ultimately, what matters is what's being reflected back off the screen. And then, they go, well, my screen's a 1.3. And I'm like, yeah, but that's marketing. So it's really probably closer to a 1.15. It's like all the weave screens, they say, oh, we're this, but they're really closer to like a 0.7 and stuff like that. So if you take those numbers, you're always going to be disappointed. Really what matters is what's measured off the screen. And that's what I do when I come in, because I'm measuring the reflected light as opposed to what's coming off the projector itself. So we had a couple more questions here.
Oh, fellow Michigander. Awesome. Love it. So P Green says, thanks for the info. He'll probably be getting a call from him.
Look forward to it. You're welcome.
Sean Gonzalez. Oh, this is an audio question. I have my surrounds on my Marantz amp. Should I put my Atmos speakers on my Denon or put them on their own amp? I think a pretty common audio progression, if you're moving from a receiver to separates, is to get at least your mains and then your front three onto an amp, and then maybe the bed layers.
Yeah, the bigger speakers, the ones you want to move first, because they obviously draw more power. They're receivers. It just, some receivers are really good. They have a really good transformer and everything else. And honestly, most people probably don't use as much power as they think that they do. I mean, you look at the efficiency of the speakers that you have. If they're like 99 dB efficient, that means 1 watt. They're 100 dB at 1 watt. And granted, that's only at 1 meter away, but you know what I mean? It's like at the end of the day, how many watts are you really actually drawing? And a surround speaker, again, if it's like a small one or something like that, you're never really going to draw a lot on that. So again, like a lot of those things, it just depends on the capability of the receiver that you have. What are they really rating at? What are they really putting out power? So look for somebody that did a review of it, that actually bench tested it, and stuff like that. But I'll bet you, with most people, if they switch to a receiver amplifier, again, as long as it's not like insanely underpowered, to a standalone amp for their surround speaker, you probably wouldn't even know that you did it. Yeah. But if you have like a really big front loudspeaker that you run full range, that has a big impedance swing and it has big drivers, and you're trying to run it, and it's like a horn or something, or like an electrostat or something that's not very efficient, now that amp is being taxed. So the transformer that's being shared across all those amp channels is being, asked a lot of, because of that speaker, so separating that load out. I mean, that's what everything is. Crossovers are separating the load between the sub and your speaker, so that your speaker has more head. It's all a matter of like sharing the load across things. When you share loads across things, everything works a little easier because everything has more breathing room and things like that. Yep.
So Kris Brown, how much do the two versions cost? Meaning, I think the Lumagens, and the main difference. Yeah, that was the main difference, the number of inputs.
So in the 4 series, the only difference between any of the 4 series ones, you'll see like a bunch of different models, is the numbers of inputs and outputs. They start at 6,500 for the lowest model, and the highest model, I have a price sheet here. The highest model is 9,000. And so the lowest model is 4 inputs and 2 outputs. And then the highest version is 8 inputs and 4 outputs. So that Raidance can drive 2 separate displays. That's for people that want to have it driving 2. And then the 5 series starts at 8,500, and the top of the line one is 9,500. So basically the full spread for Lumagen products is $6,500 to $9,500. So
easy to achieve.
That's full retail, stuff like that.
So he says he's a 137-inch center stage XT. Good to know what to expect from it. So cool. Yeah. Glad the conversation is so applicable. Dr. Downforce, I have an older Sencor Lumagen paired with the JVC. Is it worth upgrading to the newer one? Is that an earlier generation, or?
I don't know if Lumagen was selling through Sencor and they had Sencor branded, like an OEM, where you put your name on it. I know they do that with Wolf. Wolf Cinema has ones that are branded Wolf, but they're just a Lumagen. So I'm not sure which Lumagen he has, and I'd have to research what an X75 is. But a newer Lumagen would make it, regardless of what projector he has, where he could, do tone mapping and things like that. So he'd be able to, use it with newer sources like Apple TV, blah, 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 where the Lumagen he has now is limited to, like DVD and stuff. I'd have to look. I don't know which ones the Sencors did, because it really matters what the core version of that Lumagen was. So, each of them had different limitation because they were a product of that generation, so there was the ones that were, back in the DVD days, and the ones that were even before that, and stuff like that. So, but a newer one will make it where an older projector, because I've had clients that are like, hey, I've got this projector that I really love it and stuff, but it doesn't work with all this other stuff, so I got to buy something else. I'm like, well, actually you can buy this and you could use those sources with the one you like if you like it that much. Like, oh, you can do that? Yeah, you can do that. So again, video processor solution for a problem.
Perfect. Yeah.
So
The X75R, is that a much older JVC generation?
I'd have to look it up. I don't remember those off the top of my head. Like I'd have to see how far back generational wise. I'm not good at the model numbers on that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at like the last, like, you know what I mean? Like the
couple,
last three, but like eventually it all goes down the toilet.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I don't know any before the, like, I think that I had the X7 when I built the theater room. I had an X790 for a short period of time, and then the NXs hit. I have no frame of reference for what there was really before that. I wasn't paying attention to projectors much then.
So it looks like that was one of the. It's 1080. I can't tell if it's one of the ones with the E shift in them or not. But it is a 1080 one, so it would give them the ability to look at, it says 2K to 4K scaling. So I imagine that means that it's a E shift. But yes, with that projector, one of the newer ones would make it where now you could use, like, you could watch stuff that's 4K HDR and things like that and have it convert. But again, like, depending on the sources you have, that would be another thing where I'd talk to the person about it and say, like, okay, well, my only source is an Apple TV. Well, Apple TV, you can get 4K SDR streams, and you know what I mean? Like, again, it's never a black and white
ways to solve it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're probably on your way to pretty soon. You'll probably be at least 4 generations behind in projector. So
yeah, he's getting pretty far back there. And there's more to it, it's like, how fast does it sync? What's the light output of that projector? Like they hit a spot where they like doubled their light output, and there's all kinds of things. Like the E shift kept getting better. Then we got to native 4K. Then it's additive. It's not like people concentrate on one thing and they go like, oh, okay, well, there's that thing. It's like with video processors, they're like, well, I just want it because of HDR, and I'm like, video processors do a lot more than just HDR. You're not spending $8,000 for one trick pony, hopefully, but I mean, that might be the thing that, again, takes you out of it, and that's what you're trying to fix that problem for. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of solutions for that, but hopefully, there's more, that you can get than just that adds value on top of that. So I have like a lot of people that reach out for a Lumagen because of HDR, but they have a scope screen, and then they get it, and I have all the aspect stuff set up, and they're like, oh my God, I would have bought this a long time ago had I known that it did this. Cause like now that I have this, I never not, want this, so.
Cool. Well, I think we're right at 2.5. We've exhausted the questions. We probably call it here. I think this was good. Cool. This is what I was hoping to accomplish with the stream. I think hopefully we put out a lot of demystifying information. Hopefully help some folks maybe be better qualified in their decisions to pursue or not pursue a product that may or may not benefit them. So I'll have this for not quite another week. I think it's going back by next Tuesday at the latest. So probably Monday or Tuesday. I'll keep it through the weekend, hopefully get a chance to get some more time in these next few days, watch another movie or some other content down here and play around some more. But it's been good. I appreciate your efforts in helping
glad
get
it
it
help.
set up.
Glad we could go through some of the features. Hopefully people learn some stuff on what it can and can't do for them. As I said in the beginning, if anybody, is in the market for one of these or anything, I'd be happy to help you out at deepdiveav.com, deepdiveav@gmail.com, whether you're, looking to add one to your system or you already have one and you want to get the most out of it. I have different levels of services that you can take advantage of, or, need somebody to come out and calibrate or whatever else. I'd appreciate any business you want through my way.
Cool. Yep. And everybody stay tuned to the channel. I've got let's see, what is the next content? I might do a little short stream this weekend, and then that probably will likely be the last stream for a couple of weeks. But I'm trying to make sure that I've got content primed and ready. I've got some interesting stuff. I've got an interesting video, I think, that'll be enlightening about streaming quality versus disc download quality. But I was going to put that out Friday, but Infuse, actually, this is pretty neat. Infuse just put out a new update today, actually, and added a couple things. So I'll get this video out probably sooner than later. But in Infuse, you can access movie trailers, and you can do like smart groups of movies and stuff together now. So for the people out there that are ripping and setting up movie servers and using Infuse, there's some cool stuff coming there. I got a little more coming on Kaleidoscape, disc to digital, more on the Halo remotes as well. So yeah, stay tuned. Otherwise, thanks so much, everybody, for churning out. On your way out, please, by all means, hit the like buttons, share the content, and yeah, come on back for more. Thanks so much.
Guys, have a great night. Thanks for joining.